We are recording.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hopkinton School Board meeting for Thursday, October the 15th, 2020. It is 5:30, and we have a full board with us tonight with Seth Aframe, Norm Gupel, Rob Nato, Andrea Folsom, and myself, Jim O'Brien. We are joined by Michelle Clark and Superintendent Steve Chamberlain. And a warm welcome to our school board student reps, Juliet Shahade and Mia Richter. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining. We're really happy to have you here. I'm going to go through a few more formalities here, opening up, and then I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves in just a few minutes, if that's okay with you. So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I know Steve has a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Steve. So we are meeting completely remotely again this evening. And we can do so because of the governor's emergency orders that have come out of the pandemic situation that we're in. The governor's emergency orders allows for public bodies such as the Hopkinton School Board to conduct our business remotely. Under normal circumstances, meetings need to be held at a physical location so members of the public can participate. But the governor's order has waived that so long as we adequately post the virtual meeting so that people can join us and participate in these meetings. So we have a Zoom link that people can participate in. There's also a call-in option for those who wish to call in. All the other provisions of 91A, which is the open meeting guidelines, are being followed. So we're recording this meeting. We'll have minutes available following the meeting as per the RSA. And there will also be 2 opportunities for public comment during the course of this meeting. As we get closer, I'll explain how members of the public and attendees can provide public comments. So with that, I would, the town of Hopkinton over the last week lost a very respected community member in Derek Owen, who I know many of us know Derek, or even more of us have read about Derek or have been impacted by a lot of the work that he's done. I knew Derek for many years in his role as a state legislator here representing Hopkinton in the State House. Derek was very committed to conservation. Derek was very committed to farming. He spent a lot of time thinking about and advocating on those 2 issues. And that's how I knew him. And he was always open and generous with his time, very funny, always very lighthearted and very much appreciated. And I know the town of Hopkinton has lost, a truly great citizen in Derek Owen. Steve, I don't know if you had any words you wanted to say about Derek.
Sure. It was, I got to know Derek Owen through his exchange. He had exchange students and he opened his farm to many students. And it was just a wonderful relationship. He, one of my first years as superintendent, as a legislator came to board meeting. We talked about legislation, but he was, as you said, so focused on conservation and providing the farming opportunities for kids, exchange students from kids all over the world. So no, it's a tremendous loss, but I certainly appreciate the memories of Derek and working with him as a building principal.
Thank you, Steve. So I'd just like to ask everybody to have a moment of silence in remembrance of Derek and all the work that he did for our town and for our state. Thank you all. And so next up, I gave a little bit of a warning, but I'd like to welcome Juliet and Mia to the board as our student reps. I know we're very excited to have you. Actually, all been wondering for the past couple of weeks when we're gonna be joined by our student reps, and so we're thrilled that you're here. And so, if you don't mind, just introducing yourself to us, you know, some of your interests and anything about you that you think we should know. So I don't know who wants to go first.
I can go first. Thank you. Hi, I'm Mia. I'm a senior. I'm interested in music, I guess. I play music a lot.
That's great. What are your plans after graduation? Do you have any yet?
College, hopefully.
Nice.
Mia, what do you do for the newspaper?
Oh, right. I'm the editor of the school newspaper.
Oh, there we go. Seth, any other leading questions?
I'll continue to ask leading questions. I'm good at that.
Yeah, thank you.
Interrogation.
I make a career out of that.
Welcome, Mia. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And Juliet?
Hi, I'm Juliet Shahadi and I am a junior. I also like music and I am in the Interact Club, so yeah.
Do you play an instrument?
Yeah, I play flute and some guitar.
And what is your officer position for the junior class?
Oh, I'm vice president.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Good thing I'm here, guys.
Well, Juliet and Mia, thanks again for joining us. And so as we go through our agenda today and in future meetings, and, you know, feel free to hop into the conversation if you have an observation or something to add. And myself or any other board member might ask during conversation if you have thoughts or opinions. So don't be shy. Feel free to share it with us as we sort of move along. It's a learning experience, I know, for you. And your input is extremely valuable to us, you know, bringing the student perspective to our work. So, so don't be shy. We definitely want you hopping in. So I really appreciate it. All right. So back to the agenda. Steve, is there any correspondence this evening?
Yes, there was a number of correspondence in the folder, including some an update from regarding school funding. And so, yes, a number of correspondence in the board folder.
And as everybody knows, I have trouble following the 1, 2, 3 numerical order on our agenda, which I apologize for. So Steve, is there any additions or deletions from the agenda tonight?
We do have a revised agenda. We're accepting a $500 donation for the golf team. The Hopkinton Public Schools Foundation, some funding for some software at our elementary schools, a number of PTA donations. We're also just want to make sure you caught it. Since the packet went out, I added a couple of more Schedule B nominations, Student Council at Maple Street School. We also, Andrea and Seth can speak to the policy of the anti-discrimination policy, but because there was a late addition to the packet, we're going to table the action item until our next meeting. I also created a supplemental materials folder for the board, and in there was an FAQ from DHHS, is a guiding document that I've sent to quite a few community members this week. I wanted to make sure you had that document as well. That's about it.
Great, thanks, Steve. And before we get into the meat of the agenda, I do want just a little bit of housekeeping or for us just to be aware of. We are going to be joined by our consultants from Hazard Young to talk about the presentation of the superintendent profile from the work that's been going on over the past couple of weeks. So they're scheduled to meet with us right around 6 o'clock. And so I'm just going to watch the agenda and sort of try to manage our time so that we can take advantage of their time and try to get them on as close to 6 as we can. And so I just ask a little bit of patience. If we skip around, I'm not sure we'll have to, but we may have to. I just wanted to give a little bit of warning that I may try to dynamically steer our agenda a little bit just so we can meet that timeline as best as we can. So with that, our next item is approval of minutes. And so I would ask if there is a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the minutes of our last regular school board meeting held on October 1st, 2020.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion's been made and second. Is there any discussion, additions or deletions or edits? All right, seeing none. These are roll call votes. And so we'll start with Seth.
You said, sorry, Seth, yes. You're very muted when you're on your microphone to me.
I did say you, yeah, you're on.
All right, that's better.
Are you a yes or a no?
Yes.
Norm.
Norm Goupel's a yes.
Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
And Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Jim O'Brien is a yes. All right, is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the minutes of the non-public session of the Hopkinton School Board held on October 1st, 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, additions or deletions or edits? All right, seeing none. Seth.
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Norm.
Norm Kupel, yes.
Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
And Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Perfect. I can keep my microphone up here. We've come to the first public comment portion of the meeting. And so if anybody who is attendee wishes to provide public comment, if you move your cursor down towards the bottom of your screen, there is a raise hand button. And if you click on that, that will let us know that you have a public comment to give. And we have two public comment. This is the first one, and then we have a second one towards the conclusion of the meeting. And so the first hand that's come up is Andy Locke. So Andy, welcome. You can unmute yourself, and if you just start by letting us know your address, that'd be great.
Thanks. Yeah, Andy Locke, 641 Rollins Road. I sent some correspondence in, which I think is going to be in the folder, and so I won't go through that in too much detail, but I have had a few conversations about the hybrid model versus the remote versus the full in-person. And it looks like you guys may have that on the agenda, or at least some variation on that. So I just want to provide a little bit of comment before you get to it. And that in much as I wrote, I think we're right now in the middle of where we need to be. We either need to be fully in school or fully remote because of our inability to do the synchronous learning. And I understand, it was great. I loved some of that correspondence on that. That was, I thank you for some of that communication, and that it sounds to me like that isn't viable at this point. I think originally when the administration, they had proposed the remote option, understanding all of the restrictions, that the intention was to move to a synchronous model where we would have full instruction. So right now we're getting half instruction, and there's grave concerns with where we will get to as a school in supporting our students. So, and I know that there's some discussion on what's going to happen over the holidays. I'm not sure. And I propose this not because of current health concerns, although we do see the COVID cases rising rather significantly right now, but really strictly on an academic basis. And I think the administration did a fantastic job in putting together a proposal earlier in the year that would allow us to cover our academics and still deliver some of that social emotional that is critical for students. By having shorter classes and having time at the end of the day, but I won't go into that proposal. But so I think there are options out there, and I urge you guys to move with some urgency on this, because with each week, it's getting that much more difficult to make up the time we're losing. And so that's it. And finally, really thank you guys for the work you're doing. I understand it is, yeah, I do some things with ski coaching, and it is unbelievably painful to try to figure out how to make things work in this environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate it. And we do have, I think a lot of what you commented on we'll be discussing under the under item, I guess, agenda item 9, items for board discussion. Well, I'm sure we'll get into a bunch of this, but thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Next hand that's raised is Sarah Matson-Dustin. Good evening, Sarah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sarah Matson-Dustin, 517 Dustin Road. I wanted to really thank the Harold Martin teachers and administrators and everyone else who was involved, which I'm sure was all of you as well, for the huge amount of work that went into the sudden switch to remote learning. It's readily apparent how incredibly hard everyone has had to work in order to make it go as smoothly as it has. So I just wanted to send a huge thank you to everyone who is doing all of that work. The second thing I wanted to say is that I'm really hoping the board will address tonight, so the community can hear the conditions that led to the closures of the buildings at both Harold Martin and at the high school. I appreciate that it's really hard to keep little kids away from teachers. It's really hard to keep little kids away from just about anything. But at both the high school and at Harold Martin, large numbers of adults had to quarantine. And I'm curious how we can adapt our protocols to reduce the amount of adult to adult contact. It seems that if we could make adjustments there, we would achieve a couple of outcomes. Hopefully we'd actually be making our buildings safer for the staff, which I think is a paramount concern. And perhaps we'd reduce the likelihood of having to do sudden emergency closures like we've had to do twice now. So I'm hoping we can think about, is there something that we can tweak that would reduce the number of contacts between adults that would result in these large numbers of quarantines? So look forward to hearing the discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. And again, under that item number 9, part of that will be reviewing the decision to close the school and what led to that. So hopefully we'll get some of, if not all of those questions answered for you this evening. Next hand is Amanda Gilman. Good evening, Amanda. Thanks for joining.
Good evening, all. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for doing this. First, I have to give profound thanks and gratitude to the teachers, all the support staff, the cleaning personnel, administrators, board, everyone hard at work for the tireless hours you've no doubt all spent getting us into in-person instruction, which is clearly valuable. And you no doubt all received my email last night, and thank you to Steve for placing it in correspondence. The basic premise of my email was to point out that once again, as was just discussed, we have inevitably had to shut down our schools, and it's inevitable. I get this point. My point is not to criticize the work that has been done thus far, nor criticize the need for shutdown. Rather, I want to hear a thoughtful discussion on the concept of an all in, all out. And I don't think that's exactly what's on the agenda tonight, but I would like to hear thought process on whether an all in, all out concept could work, a quick pivot to remote learning. It has been frustrating, I think, to see, one cohort have to catch up to the other cohort when we make this fast pivot. And it's a tremendous amount of work. I can't even imagine for everyone to do these fast pivots and keep these kids, these cohorts together. So my point is that the cohorts clearly and the half capacity has done us nothing in terms of preventing shutdown. We have had to shut down twice anyways. It has, however, given us half the in-person learning time. And that's what I'm most concerned about. So I was wondering, I would like to hear the administration, the board. I asked the question, if you will consider having a thoughtful discussion on the concept of an all in, all out, on off switch, if that is even on the table. That's my question.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I would just say that we have had discussions, and I would assume we'll continue to have discussions on the hybrid model, what's working and what's not, and reviewing the matrix that we have set up.
Does the matrix have an all-in return to full learning on it? It
may. I think any board member can bring up at any time how to use that matrix for decision making. And so I don't know if I'm probably not directly answering your question. Does the matrix have an all-in? It does not, but right. it does have. I'm struggling with the term I'm looking for. I apologize. It does have conditions in which there's no community spread, by which we've talked about as a board. If we're in, I'm going to use the word green because that's the color code associated with the matrix. But if we're in green over a period of time, that would lead us to have conversations around bringing more students back into the school buildings.
So that will not be.
That's how the matrix has been set up.
So that will not be considered until green is met, is what you're saying. I guess my point is that this on-off is a much simpler, cleaner concept, all in, all out, and half cohort is not preventing the spread anyways. So I would like to hear discussions in the future on how we can do it better, as was just mentioned by the previous, but B, how we can get more in-person learning, because I think that's critical. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Amanda. Bye. So the next hand that's raised is Tammy Clay. Hi, Tammy, thanks.
Hi, Tammy Clay, 62 Buckingham Lane. Simple question. I hope it's simple. Has there been any update on when the orders for the Chromebooks are going to come in so that every student who is at home has one?
That is a simple question, Tammy. We'll see if we can get you a simple answer. Steve, I don't know if you have an update.
No, they're still on back order, Tammy. It's something that I bother Matt with probably too often. But we do not have a shipping date yet for the Chromebooks.
So if a parent is going to go out and purchase one separate because their child doesn't have one, is there a way for the tech to set up that Chromebook to make it usable for the student?
Yeah, it's pretty, the Chromebooks are pretty universal, but yes, we can certainly help. And Matt has provided some direction. And we have we have provided the community members with some, so.
Okay.
And I do know, I think I saw it on the website that Matt has put some technical specs that parents could consider when they're looking at Chromebooks.
Okay, I'll pass that on to my daughter-in-law who's looking for a Chromebook. Thanks, you.
Tammy.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, I don't see any other hands raised at the moment. And again, there will be a second public comment period towards the end of the meeting. All right, so I'm going to close public comment, and I'm going to ask for if there's any comments from the Hopkinton School Board. And I don't know who would like to go first. Mr. Goupel.
Sure, I'll be quick. We have a lot to go through. I want to welcome Juliet and Mia to the school board. It's great to have some students back here. I hope you guys really enjoy being here, listen to our discussions, and really learn from us. And your feedback on what's going on in the schools are always welcome here with comments or suggestions. So I really wanted to welcome you guys. Anytime you have any questions, just interrupt Jim or anyone here, and we'll gladly listen to your comments. Last thing, I just want to say thank you to the athletic department for having their senior day for our students, our senior athletes for the soccer team. And it was great to see our students get their welcome today. So that's all I have to say.
Rob, you're off mute, so I assume you want to go next.
I didn't know I was off mute, but I will go next. So two quick things. I just wanted to, I'm sure Seth will do the same, thank everybody who participated in taking the survey and the various forums and the one-on-ones with our folks from Hazard Young. It's been really helpful. We'll get some updates tonight on that. So thank you for that. And, you know, I guess I'd like to speak a little bit directly just for myself on the 100% in approach to school. And I'm just going to be honest, I just don't see a path forward to that. For me, you know, we talked about space issues and safety issues and 6 feet in masks. And I know that there are other folks out there who don't see that as the guidance. I struggle, I guess it's the word conundrum here, where the science on one side tells us one thing and you can find science on the other side that tells us something else. The great Barrington Declaration that came out and that's been talking about herd immunity and that approach, and which is a part of this, you know, going 100% back in. I just can't get there. I think that from my understanding of the disease, where it's at and the guidelines that we're getting, this half-in approach that we have in terms of safety is what we can do from that, the COVID perspective, right? We are the board of COVID at some point, but we're also the board of education. And that's where I begin to wonder about, you know, as Mr. Locke said, is it better for us to be fully remote? Is that the way we deliver the most amount of curriculum to students? You know, we can deliver the same amount if everybody's in, but from a safety perspective, I just cannot bring myself to that conclusion at this point. And I know, you know, there's people on both sides of that aisle, but that's where I'm at. So thank you.
Seth?
So yes, Rob did take what I was going to say. I do want to thank everyone for participating in the community surveys, filling out the online surveys. I think in about 5 minutes, you're going to hear that has been very helpful and helped put together a good leadership profile for our district. I also want to note that we've had close to 30 volunteers for the screening committee, which anyone who thinks about that realizes that's way too many volunteers, which is a nice problem to have. And so I have not responded to all those people. We will, by the end of this week, we will constitute a committee that represents various groups throughout the community, and looking at a committee of around 11. So should you not be selected, it has nothing to do with your merit. It has only to do with making sure we have people that represent various groups around town. But I really do want to thank people in such droves for coming forward to be willing to, really throw themselves into this. And I also want to say that as we move forward, this is not the only volunteer opportunity that there's going to be. As we have new leadership next year, there's going to be all sorts of things that will be thought about and considered, and input is, I'm sure, going to be important. So all those people who volunteered, I hope this is the first of many times you're willing to step forward and help in one of the many ways that we need help. So thank you, Jim.
Andrea.
I really don't have a lot to add tonight. I know we've got a lot on the table, so I'll cede my time.
Thanks. And Juliet and Mia, I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but if there's anything you'd like to add. So this is a time for board members to, I guess, say what's on their mind or any sort of information they want to share. So no pressure to do so, but I just want to give you guys the opportunity if you do.
Just back to the entire synchronous learning thing. I understand that there are reasons that doesn't work that obviously haven't been shared for good reason. But I think it really does vary by class, and that with certain classes, full remote makes the most sense. Just from my personal experience in classes such as English and history, it's much easier to do half and half. But in classes like my calculus class and my physics class, it's very difficult to learn something like that on your own. So that's just, I think at some point, if you're only learning half the material, full remote might make sense. Yeah.
That's great. That's very helpful. I appreciate that. Mia, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. I just want to, do two things, I guess. First is just reflect on the fact that we just passed our 1 month back in school. If it feels like, I'll just be honest, it feels like it's been a whole school year already, but we've been back in school for about a month. And so I want to recognize the amount of work that's gone into the past month. It obviously started before a month ago, but the past month of in-school learning has been challenging, I think, for everybody. It's probably been rewarding for everybody as well. And so I want to acknowledge and thank, the administration, our staff members, all of our teachers, and then my colleagues here on the board for putting the time, effort, and energy to get us where we are, which is a month into a school year that's challenging, to say the least. And so part of that reflection is, to the conversation that has been brought up here around, 100% in, or how we move forward. And, when we started this summer, when we started talking about the back to school, one of the things that we talked a lot about was the concept of adaptive management, that we're going to start a process. We're going to do our best, bring people into the building, learn from what's working, learn from what's not working, and adaptively manage our approach. And so I think part of today's meeting is we're going to be doing that. We've been adaptively managed when we had to shut the schools down because of because of lack of staff support, that we could keep the schools open. So we managed going remotely. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to learn from what's working. And Juliet raised some issues around classes, what works where. How we adaptively manage our schedules is something that I know has been worked on. So I just want to keep that in mind, because the hybrid model that we started with, I think when we all agreed and sort of moved in that direction, we all understood that was probably not going to be the only decision on our educational model this school year as we move forward. And so I think having that conversation is good. And then I just want to reflect on what Rob shared. Is I agree with him, and I think I've shared this with people who've reached out to me asking about the 100% back in school model. You know, we are operating in a global pandemic. I think, you know, this board made the determination that safety of our staff and of our students was of paramount importance as we brought students back into the classroom. If we wanted to keep the 6 feet of separation that we felt were guidelines from the CDC, that were responsible guidelines, that enabled us to, you know, bring 50% of our student body back in. We all agreed that was following the health and safety guidelines within school education was something we wanted to do, which is why we are where we are. And then we set up a decision matrix, which used information about community spread, both in our town, in our state, and in our county, to help us make decisions about what's safe to bring students into the classroom, our staff into the school buildings, depending on the rate of spread, both in the community around us, as well as in our buildings, different levels of decision-making depending on where we're at. I think that matrix is a very good model for us to be looking at. It's not perfect. It doesn't answer every scenario that comes our way, but in terms of a planning tool, I think it works pretty well. And so when you think about bringing more students into our buildings, you know, I do think you have to look at that decision matrix. And I think, to be honest, if we need to have low to no community spread before, as again, was one board member, I would feel comfortable bringing more students into the building, because it's not just the students and the faculty who are at risk. It's really the full community that's at risk for spread of the virus, as we know. And so it's not as simple as an on again, off again. It's really, how do we manage our risk? Right now, I think we're managing our risk pretty well. It's not perfect. We see that we have to close schools in order to alleviate some of this. But if we were all in, I'm just thinking if we had every student in and we had cases of COVID, the amount of contact tracing and the amount of individuals who would be quarantined would be far greater than we're experiencing now with the limited cases that we have in district. And so I know it's hard. It's hard for all of us. We all want more students in our classrooms. We all want to return to normalcy. And I think at least I find my job as a member of this board is to weigh, you know, the educational risk, the risk to our students, and then the risk to our overall community of how we operate these buildings with, you know, 1,000 students, hundreds of staff members, as well as volunteers and others who enter and exit. I mean, it's a large responsibility. So I wanted to say that, because I echo where I think Rob was, that it's really hard to see with the current rate of community spread and where we are, how we bring more students in. And I just think we have so much on our plate. We have so much, you know, the superintendent is so busy, to ask him to create a plan to bring more students back into the school building when we know the situation in our community and where we are. It feels like that's not an appropriate use of Steve's or our time at the moment to contemplate that based upon the previous decisions that we've made as a board. So with that, I'd like to transition us and look at that. We almost made it. It's a little past 6, and I'm wondering if Monica has joined us. Can we bring her on over? So Seth, I don't know, as Steve's bringing Monica on our side, maybe I'll just hand it over to you to sort of introduce this piece and sort of the work that you've done and where we're going on this agenda item, if you don't mind.
Seth, you're on mute.
Seth,
you're on mute.
All right, I see Monica's box there, so I assume that she is on with us. So I will, and there she is. So I'll just take 1 minute to introduce what we're going to do next, which is the next step in the superintendent search process. So As we said in the last meeting, the next step was to get community input. And I want to thank Donna, first of all, for all the work that she did on the administrative side of this, which when I said, can we volunteer her? I did not actually realize how much work that is. And it's quite a bit of work. And she did an outstanding job helping us get all of this organized, especially in the Zoom world, which makes it more complicated than just finding a room. So first of all, let me thank her publicly for all that work. Second, as I said before, I want to thank the community for providing our consultants with sufficient information that we can be here at the next step. And the next step is to present the findings of what they learned from all of you. And by you, I mean the school board members, but also this long list of attendees and other people in the community that, that helped give them a sense of where we are, where we want to go. And so today's step is to present those findings, which are supposed to help the board start to get our mind around what are we looking for, what attributes, what qualities are we looking for, what issues are we looking to tackle, all of those things that will help us as the actual human being candidates come forward, we can match up against these qualities. So I will turn it over to Monica, who actually, and David, who ran this process, who can describe it in much more detail than I can. So I turn it over to you, Monica.
Okay, well, thank you, Seth, and thank you, Rob and Seth, for being such great board contacts. You all get back to us so quickly and give us the input that we need to keep moving. And Donna was fabulous. It was putting the Zoom invitations out to all the different groups and getting everybody organized. She really deserves a lot of credit, so I really appreciate all of her efforts. Dave and I are going to talk to you tonight about the leadership profile, which is where we bring together all of the information that we gathered from the survey, the focus groups, and the interviews. We're also going to talk to you about the list of desired characteristics that we've synthesized from that leadership profile. And we're going to be asking that the board approve both of those documents so that we can begin the formal recruitment process. Dave and I and our colleague Bill are really excited to get out there and start talking about the wonderful community that Hopkinton is. It was truly a pleasure to get to know all of the different community groups and individuals, and we very much appreciate the opportunity to do that. Seth and Rob, I would like to, if you all approve, I would like to share the results of the survey, do a quick review of the leadership profile and desired characteristics, and then take any questions that anybody has about them. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yes. Okay,
and then after the approval, Dave is going to talk a little bit about recruitment strategies specific to the region. So I want to make sure we can do all those, and we're going to be pretty quick. But if you need us to go faster or slower, could you just chat with me, and I can move it along as quickly as need be. Steve, am I allowed to share my screen?
Yeah, you should be all set.
All right. Well, as the college professor over here, please note that I am not the best at this, but I'm going to give it a college try. Okay. This is the leadership profile, but actually I want to get, I had it open. I don't know why it's not there. I want to get to, oh, here it is, PowerPoint. Okay. I want to do the slideshow, if it'll let me, and from the beginning. Okay. Can you all see where it says the community input survey?
No, Monica, we're still seeing the leadership profile report.
Okay, then I have to go back in. This is why I ask my students. How about now?
There you go.
Yes.
Okay, good. That's why I'm always looking for feedback. Okay, going through the survey. Of course, it won't let me move now. Okay. There we go. Okay. There were only 79 responses, which is a little disappointing, but we also had 75 people involved in interviews or focus groups. So the overall total we could live with. We like to have more. I'm just going to skip down, because I know that you've seen this, to the highest weighted, the comments as far as the district, the strengths of the district and the things the district needs to work on. And these very much reflect what we found in the focus groups and interviews too. The highest scores on the survey showed that the district employs very effective, all employees, teachers, administrators, support staff, that the schools are safe, and that people are very proud and put a high priority on the technology that's been integrated into the classroom. And given the situation with COVID, I think that's wonderful that people are seeing that as a strength of the district. As far as things the district needs to work on, again, these are also reflected in the focus group. So that's an interview. So, that correlation is good. That the district engages with now you can hear me? No. I'm sorry.
No, you're okay.
No, now you're muted.
Now I'm okay.
There
all right. Sorry. But the idea of socioeconomic diversity was really, this is a general survey, but the diversity that we were hearing about in the focus groups that really needed to be addressed by the board was really the socioeconomic diversity in the town, and recognizing that not all households are of the same socioeconomic status. Facilities was a concern that we heard about in the focus groups, and I'll go into a little bit more about that. And transparency was a word we kept hearing, and I think that's a reflection of the most recent referendum budget vote and teachers' contracts. Sometimes it's just not letting me go. Oh, there we go. Again, this is the respondents to the survey were asked to put in order what they think the priorities of the district should be in the next, in the next 6 months, in the next year. And again, this does reflect what we were seeing in the focus groups and in the interviews. The mission of your district is very well known by everyone. You all have done an amazing job making sure that really the entire community shares that mission, talks about that mission. In every focus group, the mission was mentioned at one point or another. So I think, from an organizational standpoint, the work that you've done to make sure that everybody's on the same page with that mission really should be commended. As far as curriculum instruction and assessment as being a priority, I see this as something that it should continue to be a priority, is already a priority with you all, as well as educational leaders who act effectively. Ethically, there were no issues at all, but that's just the title of it. Okay. Sometimes it's letting me move forward and sometimes it's not. So those are the main areas. I'm going to stop there for just a second, because really the survey was a mirror to the leadership profile, which goes into a little bit more detail. Do you all have the leadership profile in front of you, or would you like me to share it?
If you could share it, that might be easiest, if that's all right.
Okay. Well, I have that up because that was what was up before. Here we go. Can you all see the leadership profile?
Yeah.
Well, and I want to make it a little bigger as we go through. Okay. So I am going to just give you a thumbnail sketch, because of course I know that you all can read it on your own. Just a little bit of the history of the district. Remember, we use this document for recruiting purposes. So we like to give a thumbnail sketch of the town itself and the backgrounds of the schools. This is kind of a disclaimer that this data that we collected is not, this is not scientifically created data. This is anecdotal. And we don't represent the majority of the population, but we are very thankful for everyone who came out to tell us to give us their opinions and their ideas. This is just a breakdown of who we talked to. I want to thank the school board members. All 5 of you met for individual interviews, which were extremely enlightening as to the future path of the district. The building level administrators, central administrators, faculty, community, parents, the select board. Dave met with the select board, the town manager, and the budget committee. And his notes were great from those particular meetings. And this is something that I haven't done in many districts, and that's talk to former board members. And I want to thank you all for having that idea, because they did give some historical perspective that was very helpful and informative in creating the leadership profile. So in all, we connected with 154 citizens, stakeholders in the Hopkinton School District. Okay, strengths of the district, again, just as a quick summary, thumbnail sketch, your size and community feel was considered a great strength. It was mentioned in every single focus group that the community really works together in general and is very supportive of one another, and that small town feel really makes for a very warm atmosphere. In addition to that, we also heard that the mission of the district, the above all care, is really embedded in every aspect of the educational program. And what we hear from the community is that the families feel supported. They do believe that the schools care about their children, even those, and I did speak to some parents who've had some disagreements with people in the school district, but there was never a belief that their children weren't cared about. May not exactly agree on a path, but for their child, but they all know that the staff and really the district, the climate, the norm is to care. Again, just as in the survey, in addition to the climate of just the schools, the district employees, who of course really foster that climate, were widely considered effective, dedicated, and hardworking, and caring. I had said caring, I had written caring a bunch of times, but that was definitely that came through. This also was reflected in the survey. Also the positive reputation of the school district, the strong focus on academics, student achievement, that the students were, they felt safe, that there was strong technology integration, was a sense that the community, especially the parents, were very engaged, and that children felt valued. That was that care. No matter what their academic status, we got the feeling, and we didn't talk to individual students because unfortunately, and there might have been some mishap with communication, and especially that all of our meetings were done by Zoom, but we didn't actually speak to a group of students, but the parents we spoke to and the teachers we spoke to gave us anecdotal information about how the students were feeling. Also, this idea of growth mindset, and that really everyone who is working within your schools has the idea that they can continue to learn. It's not that something's not done, it's that it's not done yet. And that growth mindset it speaks very highly of, that the district can continue to grow and flourish. Okay, as far as challenges are concerned, we heard a lot about how the size was a strength because of the community feel, the community feeling that was really permeated everything. But it was also a challenge, because to administer a top-notch educational program with a smaller population is very expensive. The costs can become daunting, and I think that played out in the school budget vote this year, some of that conversation, and that conversation continues to go on. There is The frequent challenges that were described about the financial situation were that some members of the community, a vocal group of the community, really felt that they needed more transparency on the budget, a better understanding of the budget, and they needed to trust that the school board and the superintendent would explain the budget in a way that they could approve. And that's something that we're going to be talking about in the desired characteristics, that need for a feeling. And again, it may not be the majority of your community, but it was definitely the group that came out against your budget and against the teacher's contract. They're calling for transparency in operations and a feeling that they understand before they can support. And while the district is commended for having very high standards, your reputation is impeccable. But there was some discussion about the opportunities available to those students who were not planning to go to a four-year college immediately upon graduation. There was also some discussion about how things, how there are some opportunities, but maybe some students don't know about them, and the need to really look beyond the borders of Hopkinton to work together with other districts in order to maybe offer some of those opportunities. Finally, the deferred maintenance and capital improvement, the facilities, that was something that was discussed in several of the focus groups. In other words, you know, the buildings and how to maintain them. That is going to be a challenge that the new superintendent faces. So just a quick conclusion, we are going to be using the information that we found to screen candidates, of course, people to meet those challenges and to continue to value what your community thinks are your strengths. So here is, in the actual leadership profile, you can read a summary of the survey that I showed you on the PowerPoint. And then each and every group meeting is summarized. So these are my meetings with the Board of Education, a summary of the strengths, challenges, and desired characteristics. And we go on to give you a summary of every group for your information. So before I move on to the desired characteristics, are there any questions about the survey or the leadership profile? Because this is really where the intake of all the information, and the desired characteristics are kind of the output. So this is a good place to stop. I will stop sharing and take any questions from the board.
Monica, can I just jump in here quickly? Hello, everybody. I'm Dave Watt from your neighboring state, and I'm pleased to meet you. I actually had the chance to interview 65 of the 75. I did not meet with you or the former board members, so I think I got a good sense of it. And I would just encourage you to look at, actually Norm was a part of a good share of them. You're a familiar face, Norm. Mm-hmm. And we got an array of opinions, but there was a lot of unanimity too. So I would encourage you to look at the bulleted points under the strengths and the challenges. And we put all that together, and you did a great job summarizing that, Monica. But I think you'll find it, if you haven't yet, because it's a big document, some pretty interesting reading. And actually, Norm, you were at most of those. If I didn't operate as a scribe very well, if I missed something, please let me know. Okay.
Okay. Any questions from the board members? And thank you, Dave. Yes, and Dave and I were talking yesterday or the day before just about how much we enjoy getting to know the community members in Hopkinton. It's just such a nice place. So thank you.
If I was about 30 years younger, I think I'd like to move there.
Me too.
There's still housing available, guys.
We don't discriminate, Dave. You can come.
My only question, you sort of said it in the you know, with the results of the survey, the 75 people, I'm just, I guess in total is this, I mean, is what you're seeing in terms of the participation in both the focus groups and then the survey, I mean, is it I guess okay, I don't know what the right term is I'm looking for, but is it normal? Maybe that's the right term. Or do you find it low?
Sure. First of all, your focus groups, both in number of focus groups and the people who attended, you are way above average, even for some of our our larger districts. I'm not sure what happened with the survey as far as advertisement, but I would have expected probably double the amount of respondents. Having said that, because we were so strong on the focus groups and interviews, you know, like I said, this is all anecdotal to begin with. This is not scientific. So, but I would say that I would have liked to have seen more on the survey.
I appreciate that, and especially around the focus group side, because it's good to know that, you know, I would use my words that we made up for the lack on the survey side. We made up for that in the focus group. So that feels good to me. So thank you.
You're welcome. And, you know, as a researcher too, I always am very clear about it being anecdotal and not scientifically, you know, but the fact that the survey so closely aligned with what we were hearing in the focus groups, that's also another very good sign. That correlation makes me think that we were on the right track in both places. All right, are we ready to move on to the desired characteristics? Because this is what will become, and I'm going to have to split it from here and make sure you can see it, because does it say desired characteristics at the top of yours? No. Okay.
No, we're still looking at the document that you had up earlier.
This is my problem. You know, I'm gonna learn this eventually.
It's a one pager.
There you go. There we go. What happens is if I have to switch within the same software program, it won't let me while I'm sharing. I just have to learn to do it before I share. Okay. This is the one-page document that we actually send places. Dave's going to talk to you a little bit later about our recruitment strategy, but this is what we put in the hands of potential candidates. We follow it up with the leadership profile because interested candidates really want to know what's going on in the district. But this is how, when we talk to candidates, we ask that they read this first, and then we discuss the position with them. So this is a very important document for our purposes. And by the way, it can also be a great document for you as a school board when you're going to draft the goals of your new superintendent, because this is basically what you're asking them to be able to do, and you can rewrite them as goals. A lot of our boards do that. Okay, so we talked about, because there was so much discussion about the financial, you'll see within these characteristics many references to the financial. The first one, acquiring, managing, and targeting limited resources to meet specific goals. Being a strong advocate for students, that's that above all care. And regardless of their abilities or future plans, I talked to a group of special ed parents. They really wanted to make sure that the students with special needs aren't forgotten. So you'll hear about them a little bit in here. Ability to work with the board really well. You know, to have a open, honest relationship with board members, to try to come to consensus. You can't agree on everything. I'm sure you know that with your superintendent, but really trying to work in that productive manner. Be a proven community builder who will provide transparency. This is a huge one because we heard in several of the groups and on the survey that transparency, even, and I want to be clear, I am sure you all tried to be transparent. I am sure you put the information out. I'm not sure people understood it in the way that they felt comfortable with it. Okay, so I want to be clear. I'm not criticizing anything that's been done in the past by the school board or by any of your administrators. But as a community, there's a need from their perspective to feel that there's a that there's transparency in the creation of the budget and the advertising of the budget. Be a confident decision maker who has an understanding of the chain of command. And this was key. I heard time and time again how your principals are a really proven group and can make really good decisions. So making sure to recognize that they are, I am so sorry. Stop share. I apologize. I'm getting all these notifications and here it is. That's what happens when you have you see, we're back to the screen. Okay. Okay, and then financial acumen and talent to communicate short and long-term financial issues effectively. So the board is aware of current and future needs, and so is the community and the staff. Innovative solutions to financial and organizational issues. I heard from several groups, we need some fresh eyes on some problems. We need some fresh ideas. The ability to motivate and hold accountable. Be a good part of being a good communicator is being a good listener, and continued improvement. That's a lot about that growth mindset. These are some words that we often hear, and I heard in your focus groups: visible, personable, accessible, approachable, reflective. I have to say, we heard this about your current situation, but I think it's important to say that's something that the district and the community expects to continue. A strong leader who has compassion, empathy, and a demonstrated growth mindset. Again, please, for your community and your staff who are listening now, these are things that your community said already exist and need to continue with a new leader. This is something that many of your focus groups and many of your board members and former board members talked about: advocating for the school district at the township, state, and even federal level to come up with some innovative strategies for either revenue streams or efficiencies that can mitigate some of the financial issues that you are currently facing. And also a deep understanding of the teaching and learning process. And this came from your staff and your parents. They wanted to make sure that the leader understood good teaching and learning and could advocate for different professional development programs that kept teachers learning progressive ways to interact with students. The requirements, and quite frankly, this came mostly from you all, the board members. Of course, they have to be eligible to be a certified superintendent. We have to put that in all of ours, because if we go out of state, we don't want someone to apply who wouldn't be eligible. Demonstrated success at an executive level. And as I spoke to most of you, a superintendent or assistant superintendent would probably be the best. It's preferred. Now, that doesn't mean that someone couldn't come along who brought other skills to the table. Brought executive level skills to the table who haven't been a superintendent or assistant superintendent, but we need to focus our efforts on people who have walked in the shoes of an executive leader at the district level. Have a successful record of implementing innovative strategies. That's that whole new way of thinking about how to finance the school programs, whether it be advocating for additional funds from sources or looking regionally to revenue sources that maybe haven't been tapped as of yet. To be a team leader and to be a team builder, excuse me, and to earn the trust of the stakeholders. And this, this does come from your recent, the recent acrimony around the vote and the votes and trying to bring your community together. Also, in my discussions with many of you, having someone who has that strong theoretical background, I've just talked about the practical up until now, but the theoretical background of an earned doctorate isn't a requirement, but it would be preferred if you could find it. The compensation we've talked about before, and that of course would have to be negotiated once you have a candidate. We're just giving a range at that point. Are there any questions about, I'm going to stop the share just so I can see everyone, but I'll bring it back if we need it. Does that seem to reflect what you all have been hearing?
Yeah, I didn't have a question, but I did. My comment is that seems to reflect both reading through, you know, all the materials, and then at least my read. Then I ended with that one, and it feels like there's a good summary of all the comments, and you guys did a great job sort of putting that package together. So it all spoke to me. It spoke pretty true. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure to do.
Could I add one thing to that, Monica? First of all, I think it's significant that 61 people are on this Zoom. You have a lot of people who have tuned in, which signifies that so many people in your community really care about this. And we found that, you know, a real deep love for Hopkinton and the schools and hopes for the future. The only thing I would add is that we wordsmithed the second sentence of the paragraph under conclusion. I think it's under about page 5 of the leadership profile, because we wanted to, knowing candidates, serious candidates would focus in not only on the desired characteristics, but I just want to make sure we got that second sentence right. It's under conclusion, and it basically focuses on these things: collaborate with the school board and all stakeholders, academic excellence, gain the confidence of all the stakeholder groups, innovative ideas regarding the financial efficiencies, which Monica's reflected on, and building a culture of trust that will unify the greater community. Those were the big things that we heard, and we tried to wordsmith it so we'd have it in one sentence. So the question for you is it accurate? Is it inclusive? Is it what you want us to say? I'll stop.
So do you think the last clause to an outside reader might suggest more problem than there really is?
We didn't intend it that way, Seth, because every community wants to have a culture of trust. If you want us to wordsmith it or you know, massage that a bit, we'd be glad to.
I just don't know if I were an outsider who's just reading this and might think, am I entering some kind of war zone? I mean, and it doesn't say that, but I'm just trying to be the reader, trying to read between the lines. And I'm thinking whether I see that, and maybe my colleagues disagree with that. So I open that up to them, but.
You're gonna see it in the bullets under some of the stakeholder groups though, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Seth, just to let you know, as someone who, you know, talks to candidates all the time, and also I teach a class for aspiring superintendents, and I tell them to read these things. These are those important sentences they need to read in the material for any job for which they're applying. And to me, this would say to a candidate, I need this board expects me to get out in the community, to meet with groups in the community, and to continue and to really work to build those relationships. And if I do my homework, which any good candidate will, and they see the budget votes and the teacher's contract recently, that will explain that line to a T. Do you know what I mean? They'll know where that came from. But however, again, this is your document. It will represent you. So if you'd like us to change, we have no problem wordsmithing it for you.
All right, I'm going to jump in real quick. So I think that the issue of unity around the community and budgets passed for a very, very long time, almost, you know, a lot of school district meetings would come and go in a matter of 3 hours and we'd be done. And it was almost an acceptable notion that proposed budgets would be passed. And it's just in the last few years, given the financial difficulties of being a small district, where that's become more challenging. So I guess I would suggest that, as you say, Monica, you in your conversations you'll have this, or perhaps adding at the end, around our financial challenges. unify the greater community around our financial challenges. Of course, Andrea is a much better wordsmith than I am, but that would be my 2 cents on it. That's really the area of focus in terms of the unity piece.
I absolutely don't have, if that's the consensus of the board, because we are going to be asking you to approve this formally so that we can, so it can represent the district. So I just, around the financial issues is what Rob suggested. And you know what, Rob, I agree with you in the sense that I don't, what I was hearing as far as issues, you know, they had nothing to do with, you know, is your school a good place to be? Is your kids getting a good education? You know, it had nothing to, it was financial. You are correct.
For me, I mean, I think Rob's amendment there, that makes me more comfortable, because I was going to chime in that I think we do have a culture of trust, but I do think, you know, talking about the financial piece, I do think that's real, and that's something that we should be working on in the new superintendent. And then my other comment, and I don't know where it'd fit in, it might be towards the beginning, but you know, the mission of the school came out, you know, as you said, Monica, that I think everybody in all your meetings talked about the mission of the school, and I don't know if there's a place in the beginning that, you know, to find a new superintendent that will continue, you know, to build upon the mission. I think somehow weaving that into sort of there would be helpful.
Absolutely, Jim. I will go there, but I just want to make sure I have this right first before I leave it. Rob, will unify the greater community around the financial, you said a word and I lost it. I can't hear you, Rob.
Is unmuted. There we go. That works better. Around our financial challenges.
There you go. Unfortunately, this is written by us, so I'm a little bit worried. I don't use the our.
Okay.
Is it okay if I just do challenges here?
Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect.
And I'm going to suggest to the point that was made by Jim and Bob is going back to where we were. Monica, go back to where you were. I think one word can change it. One word, and that is working to continue or continuing to build the culture of trust, which gets at what Seth was saying before too. Is that okay?
I was going to use the word sustain. So those are all good words.
Since in the same sentence I used continue here, is it okay? This is the English teacher in me. Can I put sustain?
Sustaining is better. Yep.
Working to sustain a culture of trust. Is that how we want to write? Okay.
Yeah.
Although if we're saying in this sentence right here, sustain a culture of trust, then we are no longer necessarily talking about our financial challenges. Does that make sense?
Well, only if you accept the proposition that the culture of trust is completely not here, which I don't necessarily.
Oh no!
Accept. So you know.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that like that it doesn't exist. I'm more saying that a culture of trust exists beyond just financial challenges. If we are ending the sentence with financial, you know, unifying a greater community around financial challenges. Well, we want to sustain a culture of trust that will unify the greater community around a bunch of other things, not just around financial challenges.
Oh, okay.
So
okay, let me think about this for a minute. Dave, jump into
well, you could put a period around after community, because you've mentioned financial challenges above.
Well, that's what, right. See, financial efficiencies while working to sustain a culture of trust. But I think that Rob and Andrea, Rob is saying that the culture of trust is around financial challenges, and Andrea, you're saying that the culture of trust needs to be beyond it. So I think
if you put a period after the word community, it would probably accomplish both goals, because you've mentioned financial efficiencies earlier in the sentence.
Okay, Rob, are you okay with that financial is before this instead of after? Because you asked me to put it as a clause afterward. Rob, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
I like the clause after because I do think that that is the issue. We know we need financial efficiencies, but that's not pertaining to the culture of trust that we're talking about. I think where we've broken down in the last couple of years is around the budget and around, we've talked about it, or it's mentioned the different socioeconomic groups. And that's where we need to have more conversations and get more people on board with what we're doing and why we're doing it so that they feel comfortable. That's the challenge.
Actually, I have a suggestion for that then. So I do sustain a culture of trust that will unify the greater community, comma, especially around or especially in regards to financial challenges. I think that would capture both.
I knew you were the wordsmith.
Regards or regard? Because it's challenges in regards, or is it regard? I should know this.
Regard.
Especially in regard to financial challenges.
Yep.
So what if we made it, this is wordsmithing, I suppose, but instead of will unify, how about present tense unifies?
Okay, yep. And I'm talking right now to Michelle. She's on. I can't see because I'm sharing my document. But Michelle, when we go to vote, can I send you this copy with the wordsmith? Is she on?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure they vote on the right one. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. So what we can do now, if I'm hearing no more comments, is I'm going to save it, send it to Michelle in an email. Michelle, I'm sure you have access to email now too. And then I'm going to let Dave talk to you a little bit about some of our recruiting efforts that will start tomorrow once you approve. And then after that, I think Michelle will have everything to you to approve the correct version. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave for a minute, and I'll look like I'm looking at you, but I'm on Word for a little while.
Okay. This will be pretty quick. I want to make sure that we're capturing your hopes and dreams for a wide net of recruitment. It's pretty clear that this is going to be an open, some would say an intergalactic search, but one that will attract a lot of people who we think will be very impressed by Hopkinton. So the advertisement is and will continue to be in Ed Week, which is a major publication, more of it online than in paper these days. We will continue with the HYA website and any other websites that we have access to that will advertise the position. Tomorrow, or as soon as you approve the final copy, I'm going to reach out to the Superintendents Association in New Hampshire, as well as all of your contiguous states in Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts, to have the posting with these documents attached sent to all of their members. So we will have covered New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts. And that would include people who are in central office positions, assistant superintendents and superintendents. So we'll be casting a very wide net around the area. That's not to say that it's a regional approach, but we think that might be your area of greatest interest. Might be surprised that you'll get some candidates from California. There's been a lot of interest from folks who live in California who are dealing with droughts and fires and floods and COVID, who are looking to move to a quintessential New England town like Hopkinton. So you may be surprised that you get applications from outside the region as well. But we'll cast a wide net, and we did take some names of people who were suggested we'll make those contacts as well. And to protect their privacy, I'm not going to mention those here, but you can count on us contacting those people to let them know they've been suggested. Do you have any ideas of any particular areas where you would like us to recruit? Monica, did I miss anything there? Did I cover
No,
it?
I just, so far, just from being up on our website, there's 8 people who have started the application process. We're of course going to be looking to, now that we have the documentation, we need to, well, once you approve, I should say, I don't want to anticipate until that happens. But once we have that, as Dave said, tomorrow we will start the, we will be emailing. Bill is a longtime member of the New England Association of School Administrators, so he'll be using his contacts there. We've also worked in Connecticut and Massachusetts extensively. I know you're not far from Boston. And so we'll be looking to get your materials out and in the hands of not only working administrators, but also at the colleges who have degree programs, doctoral programs, into the full professor's hands for them to pass them along and make recommendations to us. So if meeting your community is fun, this next part of the journey is also fun, but in a different way, because we get to network and really talk about how wonderful you all are, and then start to screen the candidates. And as Seth and Rob were talking about earlier, we need to get all that done before the screening committee meeting. So we're going to be working pretty hard. Actually, the first screening committee meeting, we won't be going over candidates, but we'll be talking about process and further recruitment efforts. And then the actual decisions or opinions of the screening committee will be asked for them at the second meeting.
So one of the areas that we talked about when we met last time was around specific opportunities to try to get the recruitment in front of minority candidates. And so we don't have to get into the specifics of that, but anyway, that's still something on my mind that I would like to see, and if that's something that you guys can work on with Seth and Rob, just to make sure that we're reaching out proactively to those communities with this opportunity. Absolutely.
You have the advantage of having started earlier than many searches too. So that was smart for you to start early.
Yeah. Michelle, were you able to get that?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh no, thank you. I appreciate because so I just want to make sure the school board votes on the one that we should be using.
Well, it seems like we're in good shape. Is there anything else that you hope to accomplish with us this evening?
If we can have those materials, we will be sending them everywhere. So that's really our goal for tonight, is to make sure we're all on the same page for how you would like us to talk about Hopkinton and how you would like us to look at candidates as far as their experiences, so that to determine if they'd be a good fit.
Perfect. And so we'll add this to our action items this evening. And I think not hearing any further comments or suggestions from the board, we should be good to go.
And I'd like to thank you. I think Dave and I both, you all have really been such a pleasure to work with. And it's refreshing to be working with you all. You all work very well together. You support one another. And that in and of itself is something that's very appealing to candidates.
I just want to take a second to say thank you to all the people you reached out to. You know, when we started this process, it was a pretty long list, and you guys did it in like 1 week. And I just want to say, you know, I was in some of those sessions, and just to hear the feedback from the community and how honest they were, and how, you know, Dave, you took lead on really giving a perspective. Same thing with you, Monica, to our community. I want to say thank you, because it was a lot of work on everyone's part, and I'm really glad we've reached the community of Hopkinton on this search. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being so welcoming. And I want to thank Steve too. Steve and I had a good conversation, and there's a lot of affection for Steve throughout the community and the school district. And I can imagine, Steve, it's not easy to go through this, to sit here and listen to this. You're a good man, and you're a good educator. And I just want to say that even though I don't know you, I got to meet you and I heard so many wonderful things about you, but I'm just trying to think about how I would feel if I were you. And it would be kind of challenging to go through this. So thank you for your caring about Hopkinton and your strength and resiliency, and your philosophy, which you live with, putting kids first. Very impressive.
And Steve, if I wasn't clear enough in my presentation, the things that your community talked about continuing, the credit was given to you for making those things a priority to begin with. So thank you.
And thank you, David, for bringing that up, because there's a lot of affection around this board table for the superintendent as well. So we appreciate that. And appreciate your time. So thank you very much. And I know Rob and Seth will be in touch and work with you guys on next steps. So really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
For your good work.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. So going back to the agenda, our next item, we're under, for those following along, we're under presentations and staff reports. And so we had talked tonight, to bring to tonight some conversations around tuition and tuition students and sort of what we do now, and how we set tuition and have a conversation around that. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you, which thank you very much.
Sure. And originally this was planned as a more historical listening post. And Rob, if after this you'd like to hit the gazebo together and have an opportunity for any community member to talk more in depth or ask questions about it, I'm happy to join you for that piece. But I thought, just because we had the maintenance trust in the presentation that we just had, that at least I'll provide some information, some procedural stuff, and maybe Rob and I can join some conversations with interested community in the next couple of weeks and bring some stuff back. So just a little bit about tuition. So many school districts in New Hampshire accept tuition students. Now there's some, like there is district to district tuition. For example, a neighboring district has a limit and they select 10 people from another district. It's an arrangement with that district. So it can go school district to school district, but there's also within the statute the ability to accept a tuition student just individually, a family who would likes what's going on in HOP, likes what they've heard, comes and asks if they can go to tuition. So typically in the summer, I'll get 1 or 2 calls about the tuition rate and do we accept tuition students, and so it is there. So when I was building principal, we actually had someone who lived closer to Hopkinton High School than even though lived in a different town, and actually tuitioned all the way from kindergarten all the way through. So it does happen sometimes where it works best for families for a number of reasons. So we've had tuition students for every year since I've been in the district, which is a little bit over 21 years. So there's regulation. It's so 193:3 Roman 4 provides the ability for a school board to accept tuition students. Now, some school districts choose not to, by the way, so it is not uniform. It is up to the board. And a part of the tuition process, if the board chooses to accept a student and there is special education costs, those are still borne by the town of residence or the school of residence. So, and that's within the statute. So we really do accept a student on class size and things like that. So, so that's the background. We have always accepted tuition students, and there's some regulatory support behind it. Now, years ago, and I think not dissimilar where Rob's at, who talked about this, the notion of if we can get 10 tuition students at $15,000 a pop, that's $150,000 in revenue for a cost of hopefully more likely than not really to supplies. So the board has never accepted a tuition student that would have moved us over for another teacher, by the way. So we actually look at class size and where we're at and is there capacity. So what we try to do, and we have said, you know, we once, and Rob remembers, a class of 106. We had a class of 106. That was a class that we would not have supported tuition students in that class. It's just simply too big. We were already oversized. So one of the driving points, do we have capacity within the class? Because we don't want to bump it to another class and add the burden to the community. So I used to say in the old days, we could add a tuition student for a class, you know, ream of paper, and that was the cost, and it would be, you know, net savings to the district. So we had a listening post years ago, and the board at the time was interested in trying to make it more attractive by working with a different tuition rate, because it was the tuition rate, and as Michelle is prepared for tonight, you know, is certainly a significant fee for any family to do. And the feedback years ago was not to have a reduced tuition compared to what the cost of a student is. But I'm glad we're revisiting it. It's a good thing to revisit every once in a while. So, and during that time, when I first started in this seat, I did a lot of research on collective bargaining agreements. I read, I think that first year, my first vacation as a principal, I went away. I brought, back then, it was before really iPads, I brought a stack of about 20 collective bargaining. It was actually a vacation in Florida. It was great, exciting reading. But I read a lot of collective bargaining agreements, and in some of the collective bargaining agreements was a reduced tuition program for teachers in the CBA. It was a negotiated benefit. And after a couple of years and discussions with the board, and to be completely honest, some advocacy from teachers. The teachers would reach out and say, Steve, is there anything we can do? The board, back then years ago, we had this program for quite a while, established the reduced tuition program for children of non-residents. And I skipped over a little bit. One thing I do want you to know is there is an interview process and an application process. So when a student and a family applies, our building principals interview, there is references and there is documentation. We look at report cards, and we do. It's kind of, you know, it's not a college piece, but we do have an application process. And I get a referral from the principals, building administrators, and then it goes to the board. So getting back to the reduced tuition program, we felt that the board, the leadership team, and myself felt that it was a really strong statement where teachers are willing to pay to send their kids to the school. We thought that was something that was really strong. We did look at the net revenue. We liked the net revenue. And we also know that if your child is in the school, that keeps you more connected to the school. You go to more plays, you go to more games, you are engaged so much more in the school community. We thought that was a benefit to the entire population to have our teachers, when their kids are in our schools, fully immersed in the entire culture of our school, as opposed, I've got to leave right at 3 o'clock to go to, you know, see my child at another school. So that was the rationale behind establishing the program. And the board, and we actually chose not to put it in the CBA because we wanted to be able to, at the time, the theory was if we didn't feel we could offer it, if it wasn't in the CBA, we could turn it on and off as a management option and not as a contractual negotiation option. And the board really wanted the ultimate flexibility because there was times where we were having really high enrollment, and there was times we might not be able to do it. We were expanding, and we didn't want to handcuff or commit to something negotiating it. So it ended up being a management offer through that mode, and which is not unusual. It's just we didn't feel we were going to try and get something through it, if you will, in negotiations. We just felt it was a strong piece to offer on the management side. It's gone through just a couple of revisions. We did, after years, just the board decided to have a little bit longer. The more invested you are after years, we reduced it. And I think I put it in the packet if you saw the piece. So, and we also have evolved. There's also a promissory note, a contract, if you will, if you saw that in the packet as well, trying to formalize that in the last couple of years. So that's our background. And we've had as many as 3 children of faculty at a time. This year, I'm not sure. I think we've had a couple of changes, so I'm not sure we have any participating in the program this year. But the question is always, does the revenue, and because that's right, revenue is one of the things that we talk a lot about. Does the revenue from a tuition program is that return on that investment enough to continue and expand our student population by those who live outside our borders? But that's so there is laws behind it. We have an interview process. We added a program, and we'll talk about it formally. But over the years, we had the exact tuition rate. Michelle takes, and you saw it in the packet. Michelle takes the approved budget and divides the cost of elementary and cost by secondary, divides, of course, by the number of kids. But what the board has decided in the past is to take out the transportation piece, because tuition students don't participate. There is no obligation for us to transport someone who lives in a different town. So we subtract that out. And the adequacy piece is they are actually in their real estate, their taxes in the home community is contributing to the adequacy overall as a state. So we've subtracted that out. And we've combined, we did try to stabilize it. In a couple of years, it was Harold had one, Maple had one, middle and high. We changed it to elementary and secondary to stabilize it and make it less volatile. And tonight there is an action item to vote on the rate, which you saw elementary 17,478 and secondary 15,526. And what makes it so, it's up 1,200 and down, that's about the number of kids. That's an enrollment thing. That really just does it. And I would, I know it's been long, if the community, I'm sure Rob would too, would love to hear and talk with people about, do they think this is a good idea to increase revenue, reduce the overall tax burden by increasing and a little bit more diversity in our population by neighboring towns. Happy to participate and have those discussions with the community. We had it 8 years ago. Be interesting to have it again. I hope that helps. I hope that provided some structure and some content to the tuition process for kids.
Steve, can I just ask one question?
Sure.
So are the decisions made on tuition students each year? And so like, every student who's tuitioning in, it's not like we don't give them a 4-year deal. It's each year deal, so that we look at class sizes and all that on an annual basis.
Exactly. The board approves every year, and it's on our policy. But in full transparency, when we work with communities, when we work with tuition students, because they need to have some assurance, there really has to be a compelling reason why it wouldn't continue. And we haven't always continued it. We work with families that it's just not a good fit, or the distance and the connection. But if we did have a sudden surge, there was no obligation. Each year it's a fresh start. But community members do ask, because you don't want to juggle in and outs. But there is no obligation statutorily or by policy to automatically admit every year.
Steve, if the board agreed to do such an opportunity for out of district students, could they make it start on a different date once this whole pandemic is over? Or would it be pretty much, just the whole mixture of different communities coming into Hopkinton? We're going through a public health crisis. Could the board direct you, if we agreed on it, saying once this is over, we could start doing that?
Sure. Again, that's one of the great strengths, that we look this as a management option and not a CBA driven piece, that the flexibility about this program to change it, to temporarily put it on hold, to change some structure to it, is absolutely all within the board purview.
Steve, I got 2 questions. On the legal side, and I get the taking out the transportation to calculate the cost. What about removing special ed costs to calculate the cost? Is that done by anybody, and is that legal?
Yeah, that's something I could research. The changes that we made in the past was to make it a little bit more palatable. That's why we took out some of those things, and happy to research. I did ask for some update support from the DOE regarding regulations around, and I just haven't heard back yet. So Rob, I can ask that question. I just haven't heard back about any additional, more recent regulations around tuition. I just tried to check with the DOE, but I'm happy to add that question too.
And I guess my second comment is more to the board and to you. If this is going to attract the number of students where it would be a positive revenue driver I think you would need to actually advertise. And I don't know how that would sit with people. I don't know how that would sit with our adjoining districts. But I don't think that a lot of people, as they're looking for choices for their kids, would go, oh my, I could send my student to. So I think that would be part of what would have to be willing to do to make it meaningful from a revenue perspective.
I agree, and that would be a change. Right now, it's word of mouth. It's inquiring, word of mouth.
And I'm sort of building on Rob's point. I'm just curious, because how do I mean, the 17,000 that you referenced in terms of that's where our tuition would come. How does that rate? I can imagine because of the tax rates in some of our other districts how it would fall, but I guess I don't really know how that falls in terms of like a tuition for what would be quote unquote our competition, or who would be trying to attract. And so, is that in the ballpark? Is it outside the ballpark? And maybe that's not a now answer, but it's just something to think about. Because this would be, what I'm hearing is that if we chose to go down this path and do advertising, it's really a revenue driver, because our cost side, there's not really added cost to this. And so what's a competitive advertising rate that's going to help us, with more revenue and not drive up any of the costs that we currently experience?
A great question. And that sometimes people have a question between the adopted tuition rate and what's on the DOE website. And the formulas are a little bit different because of choice. Like they do it district level. We look at the district tuition level versus building sometimes. But, when we look at the tuition rate, we're in the, middle of K through 12 single districts. I haven't looked. We can certainly look regionally, see what the tuition rate is. And I don't know how much people have a slightly different formula for this process. We're very transparent about setting the tuition rate at a board meeting. I don't know if every district does it like this. Michelle is always a strong proponent of bringing this to the board and adopting it as an act. So, but certainly I can find out. Not everybody does tuition students. Some school districts, they don't want to add this burden of the application and the processing in it, but it's something that has been a part of Hopkinton's history. Well, I think before I got here.
So a quick Google search, just in terms of private endeavors, Dairyfield is about 30,000. So you have to think about who would be making choices, and I'm sure then the range to lower cost private schools, but that would be an important piece to think about.
Yeah, I had done a quick Google search too and saw like Bishop Brady's 13,550, but 50% receive need-based assistance. Two things that I just wanted to highlight that you said, Steve, that I think are oftentimes missed is that the town of residence bears the cost of special ed. So even if we tuition a student who might have additional special ed needs, that does not mean that our taxpayers are going to be paying for those things. I think that's really important. And then I guess a question, so for adequacy, does that mean if a student comes to our school, does that mean that adequacy aid from the state gets sent to our school versus their town?
Great question. And that's come up before, Andrew. So there's a couple of different types of tuition. So there is a way that board to board. So say for example, there was a student struggling at another high school and went to their board and said, I really want to try a fresh start. And I might live 8 miles from Hop, and it's in the student's best interest to come to Hopkinton. And they request that that another board contact us and do it board to board. So if there's a board to board relationship in that the boards have decided and that you can work on the tuition, then that's called a best interest or manifestation hardship case. That is, if we get to charge tuition in those cases, we accept the money, but they get, because the district is paying, they get the adequacy. But if it's a student to student, like a family has nothing, it's not that they're unhappy in their other district and there's no complaints. They just really love Rob and they really want to hang out with Rob. And so then we would get the adequacy because it's a person tuition versus a district tuition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you for clarifying that.
That adequacy payment would be on top of the tuition payment.
Correct. That's we just enroll that student and send that number to the state like any other number. Okay. But if it's a best interest or manifestation district, then we don't claim that adequacy, that slot, because we're getting school district money from somewhere else.
And I'm sorry, not just what, so if we have a teacher who has the discount for their students, we get the adequacy aid.
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah,
and that might be something that we want to consider too, is reducing the tuition to make it a little bit more palatable by the amount of the adequacy aid, since we are going to be getting that aid as long as it's a person to district tuition. Just a thought.
Yeah, all can be looked at. And again, in full transparency, I've asked to verify all these questions on updated statute from the DOE just to make sure. So I have solicited those answers and tried to do that at the end of last week, getting ready for this one. So if there's anything changes, I will let you know, but that's my understanding.
So one thing just to point out is I already do reduce the adequacy out. So in that document, we already take out, it's hard because there's a lot of things you add and subtract, so.
That's why the adequacy does come out for it, right? Because we get it anyway. So we try to lower, and we do it in mass, and the tuition, not for individual, we do it in mass, en masse. Thanks, Michelle.
Norm.
If we have a student with special needs, let's say, I'm going to use Pembroke, for example, that wants to come here. Let's say it has not been the case that's been defined that they have a special need and they come here. Which district assesses that need needs to be covered? Is it Hopkinton goes back to Pembroke and says, hey, we've determined it, or does Pembroke do its own assessment on that student?
Good question. So, and this hasn't happened very often, but typically Pembroke would have a member of our team, and they would come and they would be at the table as our team, because they have a compensation or a funding component of it.
All right, thank you.
Rob?
I just wanted to say thanks, Steve, for putting this on the agenda and bringing it back up again.
And I really would like to go to the gazebo with you, Rob, and get community input. Do they think this is of value and this is something we should pursue?
Yeah, I think maybe we can schedule some Zoom time. The gazebo's been pretty quiet as the temperature has gotten colder. Although I enjoy my quiet time and my apple cider donut down there, but getting a little chilly.
Sure, whatever works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think it would be great to get some additional community input, and I also think as we all think about budgets and putting things together, especially on the revenue side, that we continue to think about it's hard to put if we don't advertise, it's hard to see how many students we can get. You don't want to put a large number on it in terms of like what could be anticipated, but it's something to think about anyway. If this board wanted to go in this direction, how it might play into the next budget and the budget after that as we contemplate it. All right, if there's nothing else on this subject, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Michelle, for putting all together. Would be to talk a little bit about enrollment, because we have enrollment numbers. And so, Steve.
Sure, and I'm just going to share the screen. Hopefully you can see it. Does that see the, you see the colors?
We got it.
So there's two enrollment stages that we report. Opening day, which was as Jim talked about, September 14th, 15th, and this is now October 1. This is reported to the state as average daily membership. And so it's not unusual for things to change a little bit from the opening day. This year they changed quite a bit. But just to see where we're at 932, down from 990 last year. The colors I tried to track, so preschool 33 to kindergarten 48. First grade stayed pretty, but you look, so first grade went down 4. Second grade was 65, they're down to 62. So you can see a little bit of drop in just about, well, a little bit stable there and a little bit of drop. So we're down to 932. And as I talked about in the opening day, and this does fluctuate, and the state we do upload ADM. It's not fixed anymore. This is just one of the ones that starts the process. And it is, as I mentioned before, we've had more homeschools and more alternative home type schooling due to the pandemic and due to families needing extra flexibility or working on their own path. So this is what Michelle will use in the budget. But we did, just last week, I personally talked to a parent who's coming back after homeschool, coming back because homeschool just didn't work and they're coming into the hybrid. So it's not fixed. And we do report it continually, but this is the October one from Karen Parn, who's our data specialist.
Thanks.
And this will be up on the web for people to see.
Norm?
Steve, so last year when Michelle did her budget, it was 990 to start, correct? Based on her projection when we did the budget process last year?
So sometimes, so we also look at, if you remember, we commissioned with NESDEC to do an enrollment projection.
Yep.
So there's adequacy numbers and then there's projection going forward. If you remember last year, we had big decisions about kindergarten. If you remember, kindergarten was projected to be, at one point, Bill and I were talking about 5. Remember that? How crazy that was for a while. So we use this number for some, and we use the NESDEC enrollment projection for some.
The reason I'm asking that is because just so I'm understanding this correctly, the difference projected, that maybe I'm doing my math wrong, is $220,000 less, right? Because if you take in that number divided by the state is $3,800 per student, that would be less revenue coming to us this year, correct?
So you're right. So we get about $3,800 per child. If you go down, say 4,000, and you have 50 less kids, right? That's 200,000, right? About 200,000. So
I think just what I want the community to understand, we talked about this in the finance committee meeting the other day, was how does the district recuperate that? And maybe Rob will talk about that later tonight, but it's really important for the community to understand that, once we establish a budget and then we get less revenue, that towards the end of the year, how that can, that plays into our financials.
And there were some years, and in the old, there used to be, just discussions with the budget committee. For a long time, we used the minimum for adequacy, which is we will get a number for adequacy aid that no matter what happens, we could lose 100 kids, but we're going to get that minimum. And then there was always this discussion, some people would want us to use 100% of adequacy. And remember, we budget conservatively because our word is very, very important. If we commit to a tax rate, we don't ever want to go high. So, and Michelle and I will talk about it, make a recommendation to the board. Will we be going on the floor, or expect things to get better because homeschool will come back and maybe somewhere in the middle? So we budget with an adequacy number. We can either be solid, no less than, or some years, as Michelle's looked, the projection, and we're increasing enrollment every month, we've used the 100% number, right, Michelle, sometimes? So we'll take a hard look at that when we start presenting the revenue projections. Everybody okay?
Any other questions on the enrollment? All right, thanks, Steve. So next item, we're on, for those following on their agenda, we're on number 9, items for board discussion. And so this is the update of the district's schooling in a global pandemic. And so I think we'll start here with Steve, if you don't mind walking us through the closure of Harold Martin and where we're at there.
Sure. Monday, between 1 and 2 o'clock, I get a phone call from Bill saying that we had a staff member positive at Harold Martin School. Bill calls the school nurse. We talk, and we work with DH, Department of Health and Human Services, to begin contact tracing to determine the extent of the quarantine possibilities necessary. And as what we learned when we went through this with the high school, it's 6 feet, cumulative 10 minutes when they conceivably had symptoms or were present with the virus. So that was about 1 to 1:30. Lots of communications with the DHHS, lots of communications with the staff member trying to develop how wide is the quarantine. Felt pretty good about it. Bill felt good about it. We communicated and communicate with the board and say, based on where we're at, we feel pretty good about having school. sent the letter out. And not dissimilar to what happened with the high school, very quickly after that, Bill calls again, and now it's after 8, and we have a second positive case. And as we all know, there are different roles in the schools. Some are very fixed interacts with a small group of people, and some are more consultative in nature. Some roles where teachers serve as consultants for behavior, for literacy, for special education. So the engagement with staff is all very dependent on the individual. The second case was a very consultative position. And I appreciate Sarah's, and we can talk a little bit about our discussions with leadership team about how do we just ensure as best we can that our guidelines are followed. But about 8:15, we got notice of another positive test. We engage, and then I personally needed some support from DHHS, so I called their after hours number. And is it possible to do contact tracing from 8 o'clock at night to determine the extent? After talking with Bill, and Jean, the school nurse, and my conversation with DHHS, and with our rubric, right? Our decision-making matrix. Before, I felt pretty good at 1 o'clock when we had a positive. Remember, we were out of school on Monday. We marshaled our custodians to that building to clean the high-touch areas, and felt we had a pretty good time to do contact tracing. So it felt pretty good that we didn't have to do the mandatory or the directed close. But at 8 o'clock, it's different. We didn't have the time to do contact tracing. Cleaning was okay because it was at the same school. But in communication with DHHS and Bill, felt we would close for 1 day. So if you remember, my call that night was 1 day, we're going to close on Tuesday and give time for contact tracing. And we had all the numbers set. Jean had started doing the work. In the morning, I called Bill. And just to follow up, and as I called Bill, Jean is working with DHHS to determine the extent of the quarantine, right? And we're trying to make a call, mid-afternoon. And Bill, once he found out it was combined, the two cases were about 14 staff members that we felt couldn't be, were quarantined under the guidelines. Tried really hard because we certainly do understand the impact on educationally and families. Bill and his team tried really hard. Michelle and I talked about doing duties and can we go over and can we help? Is there any way we can open school? And really felt we just couldn't safely supervise the kids at all the different times that we need to. And so we closed. And we went and Bill started that first day with professional development, very quickly learning from our 2 remote full-time teachers and Matt, and started working on the technology. And we pivoted as quick as we can. Certainly one of the great strengths of this community is that they provide their feedback and their thoughts and insights, and that helps me. Believe it or not, even though it's a lot of emails, it really does help me understand. And Jim and I thought had a really pretty powerful conversation this morning. When my question to Bill, and this is where I think I have to rethink and do things there. My question to Bill Monday night was, can you run school? Which is the answer, is the question you ask. But maybe, and as Bill and I start to looking at this and asking the board some thoughts, is what, instead of what can you run school, what grades or what part of school can you run safely? And start looking at, could we run first grade or could we run second grade? I mean, this one's a pretty difficult one because it's expansive in staff. But I think from the very beginning, I think I need to reframe this and get Bill and his team to think, okay, can we run first grade? And is it okay to run just first grade if that's what we can do safely and continue? Can we run preschool? And there's a lot of emotion with this. You'll hear it from people who really want us in 100%. But we also know there was community members who felt very cared for because we closed school. We didn't have them come in and in their risk too. There's always 2 sides of this. And it is a little bit of a culture shift too. If we're going to give it 3 days, clean the place, really make sure our contact tracing is done, and then bring in, because there isn't any connection to a grade level, bring that grade level in. But only if we can, and Jim, you said it very eloquently at the beginning, if we can say that it's safe and start thinking about it that way. What part of school can we do as opposed to can we run the whole school? And I think this, get the board to think about that. Hopefully, that doesn't come up too often, but I think that's where we have to be. If there is a grade level that we can bring in safely and community members have faith and confidence in our cleaning and our procedures, then maybe we can do that. So that's some of the learning, you know, as I'm driving around trying to think about how we can help and continue, you know, and keep learning continuous, but also do it in a safe way within our guidelines. So just a little bit about, you know, the number of staff. So, and I appreciate the debriefing that the high school did with the staff earlier, and Bill and I will do the debriefing with the elementary staff on what can we do to establish that 6 feet. One of the things at the high school we did is we put in more barriers, or more glass or plexiglass barriers at certain places in the rooms that, you know, near projectors and things, there was some encroachment there that made us more comfortable. I think we have to, at the elementary level, and it's hard because so much of what we do is in the hall. You know, we don't have a lot of office space. We don't have a lot of scheduled times. There is a lot of what we do, you know, it was lauded, management by walking around. But I think what we have to do, and it's hard because some of these conversations are confidential. So I think it really is moving things to little cubbies and spaces and trying to move out of the hallway, which is a total redo of our culture. Because so much of what we do is in person, but that I think encroached, and 10 minutes cumulative over a couple of days isn't much. You know, that's the thing we have to really. So I think it is reminding, it's modeling, it's reinforcing, it's changing the culture where we have, instead of impromptu conversations, we have more defined conversations, because when you walk up to someone and talk for 2 minutes or 4 minutes that we're so used to, and it's so important part of running a school, we are putting ourselves at risk of quarantine or health, right, of catching. You know, or just being, so that's, we have work to do, there's no question. We're learning, we're trying to, you know, the adaptive management, we're trying to learn on how to manage this. The leadership team is being incredibly reflective about it, and the teachers are too. We want to continue in-person schools safely, and we understand the implications. So we're going to debrief, we're going to meet with staff and say, how can we help and keep our guidelines so we are less choppy about our continuous education. I hope that helps.
No, Steve, that was really helpful, and I'll just give my 2 cents just on your question of, you know, how do we think about, you know, opening up certain classrooms if we can do that safely, and I guess I'm fully supportive of that, especially in I say instances like this where it's not, we're not witnessing a community spread of COVID throughout the building. We don't have 14, you know, cases of COVID. We do have some, so it's not to diminish the cases that was in the school district. But if we could, you know, with 14 staff members quarantined, if we could still, you know, run preschool, run kindergarten, to me, that feels like that would be a good thing to do. That if we can limit the amount of time that all students are spending, you know, away from the classroom, to me, that feels like the right thing to do, as long, again, as we can do it safely within our protocols. So as one board member, I would, you know, if we can get there, I'd be supportive of trying to do that, again, as long as people are safe and at the educational quality, you know, that we have teachers teaching and is, you know, in the classrooms. I don't know how others feel.
Yeah, I think I'm similar. I would also love, you know, I know that you guys had a great debrief at the middle high school, and now we're doing one at at Harold Martin. I would love one at Maple Street as well. Proactively before, so because hopefully, you know, knock on wood, they have not had to go remote yet, and I would love to not have to have them go remote. And I agree, you know, I know that earlier in the year we brought the memo of agreement with the teachers forward because having that distance was something that was really important, and so I would just, yeah, I understand the frustration that I've also received, that so many staff members had to quarantine, and it just goes to show just how quickly this can spread, you know, whether or not the actual virus is spreading or just quarantine is spreading. Right. So.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And we had a really good discussion with leadership today or yesterday about how we work on this, and so thank you.
To Andrea's last point, which I think is a really good one, and this isn't finger pointing at all. I'm just wondering how can we? Is there an effective way for us to work with with both HES and the HEA around the health and safety MOA and have them help us get that message out and communicate it, because you know, for us, if we had violated it, you know, as the administration, or weren't implementing a lot of those policies, I mean, it would be up to us to resolve those and to work with. And again, it's not finger pointing. It's just how can we work with, you know, the association where we've all come to an agreement here on this MOA. How can we all learn from where we are and then, you know, kind of work together on the communication and training and support, you know, the help our staff stay safe. And so we can take the burden on ourselves as well, but I also wonder if we can work with the HEA and HES on that.
Sure.
Any other questions or thoughts, Seth, Rob, or Norm, on this, or just the concept of opening classes if we're able to, sort of as we close schools, but if we're able to open classrooms? I don't know what you think about that, to give Steve some guidance.
I think you and Andrea were very much spot on to what's needed, and I can support such a thing.
Yeah, I hear what Steve is saying, that if we can have a couple grades open and we need to close, that makes perfect sense. So certainly seems like a good next step.
Yeah, we'll work on that and talk with people about the culture and make sure that we have, you know, the disinfecting, and we want to make sure people are comfortable. So you know, I don't expect to be the next day, but if it's a 2-week, you know, I hope it's not, but you know, if we can manage it, I think every little bit helps, and I think the community will appreciate we're trying.
Steve, I had just one more thing really quickly, just kind of note, reflecting back to earlier conversations we were having at the very beginning of this meeting. You know, I know that there's another frustration that, you know, cohorts haven't stopped us for having to go out, but from my understanding, the quarantining has mostly this time been around staff members. So kids aren't having to quarantine, so they can still attend sports and they can still, you know, go out of their house. And so children are not, a large group of children are not needing to quarantine this time. And even last time as well. I know there were some, I think it's just an interesting thing to note that if we had a larger group of students in, then most likely we would have had a larger group of students needing to quarantine.
No, I think that's fair. And, you know, we do have some students that are quarantining as we did before, but as I said, this is a very consultative position from adult to adult. So.
And I guess my last question is, Steve, when you have students quarantine, do their siblings are not included in that since they're coming home? How does that work? You know, I had some people argue saying you have this student home, but they also have a student going to Maple Street and going to the high school. Could you just elaborate that?
And I think the FAQ that I provided you with the board governs that question about siblings and how we do it. So I think right now the guidance is not to. Okay. But they try and, you know, and separate them in homes. You know, which it depends on how much you can quarantine within your house as well. But we use that FAQ document for schools, and that's we have a district coordinator, so anytime I need some research done, and she always sends me that. So. And I can put that document at the end of this meeting. I'll have a whole bunch in support materials, and you know, all the superintendent search stuff, and we'll put the whole folder up tomorrow morning so people can look at all this stuff.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.
All right. If there's nothing else on the Harold Martin closure, we can move right into sort of the hybrid model. You know, we have a status report on the hybrid model. So. Steve, if you have something you want to tee up there, and I know some of
just very quickly, you know, it is all about the second day, right? The synchronous, and I think all those issues have been projected and absolutely accurate. How we're trying to push as much quality instructional time as we can. I did want to say though that there is a scheduling retreat that's happening on Friday with members of all the schools, with the building administrators and myself. Will be on Friday, and we put together a decision-making process, if you will, trying to, as you said, we're in it for a month. What are the priorities? What are the issues? What are the solutions? What are the unintended consequences, solutions? We're getting really good people, really invested people trying to take a look at how can we do this better, what it would look like. And so we're hearing, it may not seem like it, but the feedback, we are listening, we are hearing this, we share the frustration, and we've got people trying to get together and trying to develop improvements to what we're doing, as we always want to. So I just hope that people understand that we are trying to make it better. Because it is a struggle, that off day, especially in high school with a 4-day rotation, we get it. But universally though, people are really happy to see kids in our schools. So.
Steve, I appreciate that you guys are having the scheduling retreat, and I think that'll be really good. And I just want to toss an idea out on the table for you guys to consider as you work on that. Because something that we're hearing, and I know we've talked about it at this table, is just around, the way the schedule is, especially in the middle high school. We're not getting full curriculum in, and we've been hearing from some parents that are concerned. And so, when we were talking about the hybrid model, one of the things that we had stressed or spent a lot of time talking about is the whole idea of synchronous teaching as a way to bring more of the curriculum in, knowing that, we're going to only see kids every so often. And I understand that that's a challenge, and we've had stumbles sort of implementing that. And I get it. And this, again, we're a month in, we're learning, this isn't criticism, but it's something just to think about. Because I do think if we found a way to not find a perfect way to do synchronous teaching, because I don't think we can achieve perfection, but if we can move ourselves down that road to really trying to tackle a synchronous environment that works for more, I think that could help us as we sort of shift. And so anyway, the thinking I have is, we could find ourselves going into a remote learning at any day. We see this, and so our teachers are going to have to be, if that's the case, they're going to have to be able to teach, and I'm going to call it to the screen. That's not really the perfect way to say it, but I'm going to say you're going to teach to the screen, or at least do remote education. And so I just know when I think about synchronous learning, I think I have students over here online, and I have students in front of me in the classroom, and my instinct is to teach to the students in front of me in the classroom because there are people in seats looking. And I just wonder, one way to start thinking a little bit differently about getting to a synchronous model, and this isn't easy, and so I'm not saying it is, but maybe teaching to the screen, where there's a projector in the classroom for those students or in the classroom, they get the full picture of what's being taught on the screen. They have they're seeing their teachers, they're seeing their classmates. But it's really what I think we had talked about back in August. It's this idea that everybody's remote, and there's some students in the classroom that are getting, they're getting the teacher's attention. There's a bit more give and take. The next day, there's the other classes students are in. But anyway, I was trying to flip the model a little bit so that maybe the synchronous way to go about it is remote everywhere with students in the classroom. Just as a way to sort of think about the curriculum, because if we do that, we can bring more curriculum to the classroom. It won't be perfect. We're not looking for perfection, but I do think not all, but a lot of these challenges that we're having, if we could figure out a way to implement or institute the synchronous learning a bit more, I think some of those challenges will start going away. So anyway, this isn't a mandate at all. This is more just a thought that this could be something for your team to think about as a way to bring in more of the synchronous. Because I do think if we're unable to bring full curriculum in, I think even if we stay in a hybrid model for months and months and months, there's going to be it may not work. And so anyway, it feels like a way that we can maybe bridge some gaps that we currently have if we start to rethink how a synchronous model might work. So
I happy to bring it to the team on Friday. I think it's a great opportunity. Actually, it's tomorrow. Wow, I didn't think it was tomorrow. And so yeah, I think we have to start looking at this differently. And I found myself, I've called school for 12 years, and it's always the school, right? I've always called the school. So it's time to look at things differently. And I think, looking at maybe it's remote first and then kids and how do we do it? But I think we've got great people who will give it full consideration and trying to figure it out because we all want to make this work. So thank you. I think it's a great tee off to tomorrow's meet to work.
Steve, can I put my teacher hat on for 30
Please.
seconds on the same notion? So everybody's gotten correspondence for people who would like their kids to be all in, and for people who would prefer to be all remote and increase the curriculum. And unfortunately, I found myself nodding my head yes to both, saying I understand that. So what I was thinking, is because I really do believe that we can deliver more curriculum if we were remote. We could go back to a day one, day two model, but that doesn't help the kids who benefit most when they are in school. And you and I know that, there are students who can work independently, and there are students who are only going to work when somebody is there to motivate them or to help them through that. So, if we were to go back to a full remote model, I would love to see something that creates the opportunity for those students and their families who say, look, this just doesn't work at home. And we have, mini learning centers, if you want to call it that, throughout the school for them to do their remote learning from school. There's a sense of community with the other kids that are doing that. And then there's a sense of support. And I don't know if that's possible, but that's where my head is at, where we might be able to help people out in both directions.
I'm with you. I think that really was the cornerstone of what I was trying to get at in August. About 25% of the population but I think when we'll talk, I think you're right, Rob. I think whatever we have to do, if it's safe to have people in school, let's do it with support and let's do it for families that need it and trying to figure out a hybrid, if you will. But I think you're right on. I think there's some students that the remote thing works very well and some absolutely need that person to person. And how can we get, when we start talking about Thanksgiving and beyond, I hope that it will always include opportunities for kids in our schools that need to be there as a priority. Because I think you're right on what you just said.
And I think that in a conversation with somebody near and dear to me who's an educator in town, said, a large part of what is working, managing the COVID conditions is because of the number of students we have. And if we were to have a lot more of those students, the ability to manage the COVID conditions that everybody's under would become untenable. And there's a lot of really good stuff that's happening, particularly in the lower elementary schools because of that. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on this is a pretty general topic. It's just status of the hybrid model, but just any other thoughts from board members on sort of where we are and what Steve has laid out, so his leadership meeting tomorrow. All right, seeing none, we can move ahead to Steve's just sort of mentioned the winter schedule and for our planning ahead. And I think 2 weeks ago, I think we introduced the topic of Thanksgiving and the holiday break, and challenges that I know that other districts are talking about and facing in terms of out-of-state travel by both staff as well as by students, and how to keep people safe under state and CDC guidelines around quarantine. And so, Steve, I don't know if you have an update there, and then your thought process.
Yeah, so at the board asked, we've got a schedule out, and I can put this a survey out, just trying to look at where we are. For Thanksgiving, we're looking at about 70% or so, or 68% won't be traveling. We've got about 21 or about 50%, and less than that, very few 100%. So I'll put the data in the folder for people to look at. And it's just a starting point on where we're at. We'll be able to, run school by the numbers of 100% based on look on positions. It looks like after Thanksgiving, and we'll be able to manage it. But of course, there's a whole bunch that are 50-50, and then you don't know, where we're going to land. I think we're starting early enough. I did talk with the administrators about if whatever. Let's start thinking about who needs to be in school, who can be in school for services and to support if we are in a move to a little bit more remote options. So we've got some data to look at. I don't think it's, we're not trying to drive everything by those who are traveling, but just realistically, what can we do based on what we know about our staff? And the state, every week, every other week, I'm on a commissioner's call, and they're supposed to provide some update travel restrictions or guidelines for us to just see where we are. And in a minute, we're going to take a look at the decision-making matrix too. And as has been alluded to, the numbers are up a little bit. And so we'll see, at some point they were talking about if you're going to a certain area where there's a certain amount, then you can quarantine, as opposed, you can go to like if you went to Maine right now, you wouldn't need you wouldn't need to quarantine. So some of it is based on location. But I think it's a good starting point. The leadership team is trying to figure out if we have to go more remote based on things, how we can get kids in, and make sure we're supporting with services and families, and that families need essential workers. And as we alluded to, there's families that it just doesn't work at home. So we're trying to make sure we meet those needs as well.
And I should have kicked this off just for people attending the meeting that, I guess by the state guidelines, it's any travel, currently it's any travel outside of New England. The expectation or the guideline is that you do a 14-day quarantine for the travelers, and it's quarantine. It's not a negative COVID test. The recommendation is that you quarantine for 14 days. And so just for everybody watching or listening right now, that's what we're trying to tackle is, the state does have requirements that they're asking people to follow. That includes, staff as well as families in the community who may be traveling. So Steve, when do you when do you think we need to or should make a determination on what that schedule is going to look like? And we're not meeting every week, and so our next meeting is in 2 weeks, and if we are going to make adjustments, just to make sure that everybody has enough time. So.
And we're going to talk about school board schedule in a minute. I'm hoping that we can have an additional meeting in October, on the 26th, I think. So, we can talk more there, at least where we're leaning to. Because we certainly want to give notice as much as we can. I want to give the administrators time to start developing what a hybrid may look like, if you will, if we need to. Sometimes these decisions are self-evident too. If the numbers keep going, but we want kids in and we want to safely run school. And I think some of the 50%ers may come through a little bit more too, as we give them a little bit more time. So I'm hoping we have another meeting we're going to talk about the select board meeting, and that might be a busy week, but also have another board meeting that week.
And I want to thank you, Steve, for getting that survey out, because I think it did two things. I think we got information, but we also put information out that I don't know as everyone was aware of, which was the 14-day quarantine. And so hopefully this is also early enough that, we talk a lot about coming together as a community so that we can do things like have school. And I think that there was some realization in that part of that might mean, not traveling so that we can be in school. Are we also doing a survey for teachers? Is that something that's also happening, just so we know if folks are traveling?
That's right. And I'll put all these results will be in the support materials. That's why a lot of people they want to see the results. I don't mean to hide them. I just know they were that interested in them. But I will put all the results of these surveys out publicly because I know people just want to see what it came out to.
Awesome. Thank you.
Everybody okay?
I just want to make sure. Any other thoughts on the sort of the winter schedule and where we currently are? All right, so we'll move on. Steve, do you want to update on the decision-making matrix that we've spoken about numerous times this evening?
And I'll share the screen. Do you see the colors?
We do. So
we're at 7.8. That's 7-day average cases per 100,000. So we are still here. We are in yellow. But not far from accelerated spread. And it's gone up every day, I think, since October 4th. There's a spreadsheet that I look at. And so we would always been looking at, the board will discuss moving to a more inclusive program, increasing attendance based on the level of community spread over time, multiple weeks. So Jim, I think you described it pretty well. If we get to green for a number of weeks, we'll all feel safer about it. but we're trending closer to the, we're at the highest we've been in a long time. So again, this will be out as well to people to look at it. And this is now from the New Hampshire DHHS Daily Report. We have a wonderful community member who updates this for me every day. They remember every day, and I check it just about every day to see where we're at. And then I update it. I think I told you in board notes today. So that's where we are. And we will see where we what happens, but I will continue to track it, and this will drive where we, if we have a number of tested cases in our school.
Any questions for Steve on the matrix and where we are? Steve, I appreciate you you looking at it every day, and also appreciate you bringing it to us at these meetings. I think it's great for us to see it, and also great for the community to know it's being updated and tracked. So I appreciate it.
Thank you to the community member who updates it every day for Steve also.
Yeah, it's great.
So next up, if there's no questions on that, is the school board schedule, and we got a sneak preview that we might be asked to have an additional meeting on or around the 26th. So Steve.
Do you see the?
There it is.
You see it? So we took off, and I'll update this every meeting. So we had discussed about 2 different dates possible for the joint meeting with the select board. So October 26th is their first round draft pick. If we could do it on Monday at 5:30 on the 26th, and that would leave the 26th open for us. If you remember our MOA with the teachers' working conditions about before the end of October, we have some schedule updates. So that will give us a little bit of window there, plus the decision about Thanksgiving. This does outline our work through, and the only other piece, and I think Mr. Goupel might talk about this when he updates from the budget committee, we're going to have to adjust our calendar. If right now I think it's January 6th or something like that, about a presentation to the budget committee, which if Michelle was sitting next to me, she'd probably kick me. That's a very early, that would require some work during the break. And just because of the time schedule. And again, the last few years, we haven't been able to come to a board budget in December. But if we have to present to the budget committee on the 6th, and I'm not sure if that's the date, that would really, the board would have to do it on the 22nd would be the last day. And then Norm, if you're presenting to the budget committee, Michelle and I would have to work a little bit during the break and trying to make sure we have everything. Because when the board adopts a budget, to get it to, and Rob will speak to the forms and stuff in the finance, there's significant work behind the scenes from the board budget to the budget committee. And that's why typically the second week in January has helped us just because of the school calendar. But so I'm looking for the 26th and 29th, and then just where we are in the budget, if that works.
It feels important, at least to me, that we try to have a meeting on the 29th, especially if we're contemplating, doing something with schools over the holiday. That feels like a kind of decision time on the 29th, because I feel later than that is probably not respecting, the travel plans and needs of the community. And so anyway, so I would push if people are amenable to it and able to make a meeting on the 29th, that we schedule one then. I guess my question is, anybody have any conflicts that they already know about that they wouldn't be able to make make a meeting then? I know everybody's busy staying at home, but.
We'd have the joint meeting on the 26th and then another meeting on the 29th. Is that,
you got it.
The plan? Okay.
Yeah. And the joint meeting with the select board, I think would, right, Jim, an hour, a little bit more than an hour, maybe. They're going to have their regular meeting right after it. So there's some incentive to keep the joint meeting brief.
We go back to last spring. That's a light week.
And then I think on your second question about the budget presentation, I think Norm will probably speak to that based on the conversation at the budget committee. So I don't know, Norm, do you want to tackle that now, or do you want to tackle that during your presentation?
Whatever you prefer.
Why don't we tackle it now? Just
Okay.
This piece of it.
Yeah, of course. So last night, Steve asked for me to discuss with the budget committee, and Jim, you were there also. Thank you very much for that. That the board has never adopted a budget, that earlier. that early in its time frame. And I brought it to the budget committee, and the budget committee has asked for more time to look at our budget. So they've asked to stick with the calendar that I've proposed to Steve about a week ago to maintain that date of, I think, January 6th, Steve. I think that's what it was.
I think so. That's
yeah. So unfortunately, it looks like, you know, they've asked to keep that date, and if there's any issues with that, I can bring that back to them for our next meeting. But I got the feeling, Jim, you were there too, that they kind of want to stick it with that date.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. They definitely shared that feeling, but I do think, you know, Mark, the chair of the budget committee, did say that was going to be if that was going to be a challenge,
yep.
that we should bring that back to their meeting. You should bring that back to their meeting next month.
Yep.
So I think it will be a challenge. That's probably, you know, not to bring it back on that date. I mean, I do think our goal is to bring, you know, a final budget with all the background, complete, accurate, and then I just think the just going through this process a few times. I mean, we start so early for a fiscal year that I mean, it's so far ahead of when the budget will actually be implemented that it feels like we get better numbers, obviously, the longer we go. And so anyway, I just think if we meet the budget committee calendar, we're going to rush our process more, which I worry more about. I'd rather not rush our process, because I think there's a lot more that goes into our process to get the numbers where we want it than the budget committee process, which is really reviewing ours. And so my recommendation, for what it's worth, would be to really request that additional time from the budget committee, because I do think it's going to make our budget better.
I would agree with that. You know, I think that in some cases, the reason that something has always been the second week in January is because that's when, you know, what is good is able to be brought. And I think it's pretty clear that pushing it earlier would be tricky. If the budget committee has additional questions that they'd like to talk with us after reviewing, or if there's something, if it's the way that the budget is presented to them, you know, if there's something specific that they're looking for, that they feel that they need additional time to review, I'm open to hearing that. But I would request that we push it to the second week in January. You know, I do not think that for us asking for them for an extra week doesn't feel like much of a hardship, but opposite, having our administrators having to condense that work even more, that extra week really does make a difference. So
I wonder if there's things that, you know, we can think about, or you know, Steve and all of us, like, are there things that we can bring to them on a meeting on the 6th or whatever day it is? You know, that, like, it probably won't be the whole operating budget, but maybe it's things like the CIP, or it's some aspects of our budget, some of the warrant articles. It may not be all of it, that we could at least start the process. Anyway, I don't know if it's worth it or not, but that could also be something to think about.
I want to ask Michelle, if the board's okay. Michelle, where does your feeling, and Steve, your feeling on getting that budget in on like the difference of 1 week? What is the difference in the quality of?
It's huge. It's
okay.
Hours of time, and because
okay.
of the holiday and how it falls, unfortunately.
Okay.
It's huge.
So that I'm in favor. I mean, I'm relaying the message. You know, I want a great presentation to the budget committee with real numbers, and I can relay the message that it is an absolute challenge. You know, to be open and transparent with the budget committee, I will send Mark an email saying we had a discussion tonight about that, and if he has any comments or so, you know, I'm happy to bring it to our next meeting. But you know, this feedback's important that we discuss that, and I'll relay the message to the budget committee that we prefer going forward. You know, things could change, that they could ask, you know, require us, couldn't they, you know, to do it a week earlier, but I will leave it as that we want to keep it as that date on the 13th.
You know, I mean, we serve at the pleasure. Michelle and I are good
Yeah.
soldiers. We will do whatever is asked. We also have to remember that we have a full CB contract to negotiate. It's October 15th. You know, that hard deadline is the public hearing because the contract has to go to the public hearing, or it can't go to the floor. So, I mean, I know that the town is, our world is a little bit different and than others. We have a little bit more, but yeah, the extra week, especially Rob is to full credit, is developing some different forms. It's going to take some time.
That sounds great.
Does anybody disagree? We didn't hear from it. Does anybody disagree with sort of this guidance at this point to go back to the budget committee with? Perfect. All right. Thanks, Norm.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate your help.
All right, so we've moved on from school board schedule to a policy discussion on the anti-discrimination policy, the third reading. And you know, Steve, you had mentioned that we're not going to be asking for a vote, but do you want to walk through the policy? Whoever's best to do so.
Sure, and I just thank you to Andrea for her work. I put an updated revision of the policy in the packet today, and just certainly, Andrea, if you want to speak to it, it'd be great.
Sure. So we have two. Do I need to share my screen? I don't think I need to share my screen. Okay. We have the policy and then we have the plan. So what we were able to do is with the policy, the New Hampshire School Board Association, I believe, helps provide templates that we can use. And so a lot of it is stuff that we're seeing in other communities as well. One thing that I noted in here, however, is that the list of things that we're not discriminating about changes depending on where it is. And so I had gone through to make that consistent. So that's one change that you'll see, especially under points A and B. I believe are the two main parts where I saw that, those changes. So that's the only thing that's changed underneath the actual policy from what you saw. For the plan, Steve did a great job of laying out like a literal plan for us. You know, when basically what we want to do is the district is going to work to notify the community of all of the laws, applicable laws, the state and federal contacts, so who you would contact at the state and federal level, notices, and Hopkinton School Board policies that may relate in some way to an anti-discrimination plan. So we've really set that out as the groundwork of what we'll be doing. Moving forward in the year, we are then going to assess the presence of discrimination within our school district. And in the sort of the preamble, I guess, to the fleshed out plan, I talked a little bit about what discrimination might look like. And it might be explicit stuff that you think of that's really sort of in your face, but it also might be implicit. So, you know, discipline patterns based on sex or gender identity, those kinds of things, stuff that folks might not realize are happening. But those who are experiencing those microaggressions would probably pick up on that. After we've done, and this will, you know, come in the form of surveys, you know, talking to students, talking to staff, kind of the whole 9 yards. The other thing that we're going to want to then do is both work on proactive prevention plans for, and specifically this year, we're really going to look at student education programming. So what we're teaching kids, the ways in which we are teaching kids. We're going to do some professional learning, some PD days around that. And we actually kicked the year off with that. Steve led a really great one in the very beginning of this year that was very well received, which was wonderful. And then the last part of the plan is kind of what you want all plans to include, which is reviewing the plan and figuring out our next steps so that this is not just a one and done, we no longer have discrimination, like we're out. You know, this is something that we can continue to build upon and continue to engage in years to come. So the the main thing that I added is, about 4 or 5 paragraphs in the beginning above the plan that just sort of fleshes out what we're hoping to do, why we're doing it, and how we're moving forward. And just capturing the fact that this plan in no way limits what we're going to do, so that it includes ideas and places that we want to get to. But if we find through, discussion with students or staff that we've completely missed something, there's room for that as well. So it's a real living document and living plan that I'm very excited that our district is taking this on in a proactive manner. I think that it is really tough work, but also incredibly necessary. So does that capture it, Steve?
I think you did very well. Yes, thank you.
Any questions on where the policy is for Andrea? So Andrea, what's helpful at this point from us? So then we're not going to have an action item, but is there anything, in between now and our next meeting that would be useful to you and Seth and the policy committee?
I think it's really just a matter of, since this guy, we were kind of working on it and continuing to refine it right up to the end here, because this is stuff that you can really just sort of get lost in and go really deep. And so just giving it a once over, and if you see anything really glaring or you see something that you'd like to add, I know one thing that I added was a couple of additional policies that I felt were important for us to consider. So if you see anything like that, or I would also say if you note in here policies that we're missing, that we literally have not yet created, more than happy to look at doing that work as well. So that's everything.
Yeah, we will have it as an action item on the 29th. And all the drafts will be available, and it's good work. So thank you all.
Yeah, it's really good work. You guys did a great job. All right, if there's no other questions on the anti-discrimination policy, Norm, building committee update.
Yes, I'll be real quick. So we are finishing up the roof over at Maple Street. That'll be complete by October 31st. And we'll be out of there and for right now. Over at the high school, we are finishing a little bit more on the roof still with a little bit of leaking spots, but nothing too crazy. On the 5th floor, I call it the Rob Nato door. We are looking to expand that a little bit. I want to thank him for bringing it to our attention during the tour that we took with the board. And they're looking to expand his door, the door there a little bit wider. I think it's important that,
I want a little note on the top of that door now, Norm. The Rob Nato door.
All right, you got it.
Won't let that happen, but.
So they're going to be HL Turner's looking to drop a plan to make that wider. So they're going to be out of there after that now and focus their attention mostly at Harold Martin.
Norm, I think we lost your audio.
Froze too.
Oh, there you are. You're back, but we still can't hear you.
I wonder if the AirPods ran out of juice.
The kids.
There you go.
There you go. It was the kids. They're playing video games. Where did I talk about the flying steel yet?
No.
Okay. So on Monday, they had steel delivered to Harold Martin. They call it flying steel because it comes out on a crane. So that's been delivered, and you can start seeing it up at Harold Martin. So it's really exciting. They're going to start working on that. So most of the energy is going to be focused at Harold Martin right now, moving forward until the spring when they start working back at the high school. So the project's going well. Steve, Rob, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's good.
Looking forward to seeing that door wider. So Rob,
nice, nice work. Any questions for Norm? Norm, thanks to you and the building committee for staying on top of the process. It's great. It's really helpful.
You're welcome.
All right, so moving on under personnel. So we are bringing forward tonight a memo of agreement with Hess that our negotiating team has been working on. Thanks to Andrea, Steve, Michelle, and the Hess team. for the collaborative working relationship that we have. And so as we've done with the other MOAs that have come before us, you know, the draft has been circulated. And so happy to answer any questions on process now, if any board members have it. If there's any questions as to substance, I would ask that we would go into non-public for those discussions. And then once we're done those two things, if we have to do it, then I'd ask for a motion and a vote. And then we can, I'm going to actually turn it over to Andrea to walk us through the agreement public. So I guess my first question is any questions on process anybody wants to ask? And is there any questions on substance that we need to go into non-public for? All right. So then I would ask if there is a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the memorandum of agreement on working conditions with the Hopkinton Education Support Staff.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All right. I'm seeing none. Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
Andrea?
Oh, Andrea Folsom, yes. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
You're catching it from Seth. Seth?
They frame, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. And so the MOA is approved, and HEST has also already approved the MOA. And so Andrea, do you mind walking us through it?
I don't mind at all. Do you want me, can I share my screen? Is that okay?
Do you want to do it? Yep, absolutely.
I can do it. Ooh.
And you should be all set to share.
Let's see, hold on. I want to share this one. Oh, did it work?
There it is.
Great, okay. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. All right, so this was, and it's another, so it's a working conditions memorandum of agreement between us and HES, and HES, as you know, is our support staff. They're great. There are inclusionary assistants, instructional assistants, as well as a variety of other, necessary staff members that we appreciate. So a couple of things just to highlight. One of the biggest things comes under the remote classroom facilitators. And this has come up as a question I know within the community as well, as far as like, why can't we do synchronous all the time, and what are the issues around this? So what a lot of folks don't realize, but HES employees definitely realize, is that oftentimes instructional assistants may be required or are actually within classrooms acting as a monitor. And so we felt like it was really important to say basically in here that, we will continue to, if it's a situation where it's not too bad, you can kind of, class is under control and the teacher is able to do, even while working remote, they're able to provide appropriate classroom management. The IA can continue to work as a remote classroom facilitator, but our administration is going to regularly and additionally upon request really assess these working conditions, because what we don't want is for folks to have to do a lot of behavioral management and act as a remote classroom facilitator, and also, provide services to, specific kiddos within the classroom. And so that's what this kind of 3-paragraph section captures. So that was a big one that we wanted to be sure to lend support there. Sorry. I'm trying to think of the other. Oh, so another, that's right. The other thing that we wanted to think and talk about is really trying to, and this is again, kind of seen at Harold Martin, we're trying to limit the amount of time that instructional support staff needs to move between classrooms. So we're not doing cohorts necessarily within our schools. It's just not something that's happening. We're keeping class sizes small, but we're not doing strict cohorting. However, that being said, we do want to support and limit to the best ability that we can instructional support staff needing to go between classrooms or assisting in many different classrooms if it can be prevented. So that was also in there. And the final one is the remote one-on-one instruction. So this has to do with IAs who are providing support to students while they are doing their at-home days. And so this support is often, of course, over the computer. And we're just wanting to help ensure that we can find locations or provide spaces for staff to be able to meet privately, even if it's online with students. You know, one idea had been like, well, perhaps there could be earbuds, but there are other considerations. You know, if you have a student up on a screen and folks are walking behind you, that is obviously no longer a super private situation. And so that's what the language under the remote one-on-one instruction really captures. So those are the three main components within this MOA that we were really trying to address. Any questions? Super.
Right. Well, thanks, Andrea. And just want to reiterate the thanks to the leadership of and all members of HES, you know, for the collaborative nature of working through all that. It's a great outcome. So appreciate it. All right. And so next up is Steve. It's an action item on a night custodian for Harold Martin School.
Yes, very pleased to bring former Hopkinton High School student, I don't know if Rob remembers, Sean Martin, is coming after a trip down to Florida. He's come back to the area and is a nominee tonight for the Harold Martin full-time custodian position. It's been a while since we've had an opportunity to hire a custodian, so we think this is a really good thing, and he's excited to be part of the team.
That's great. Any questions on this item? Great. And then Schedule B nomination, Steve.
And we worked on this before, and this actually connects to the MOA with teachers. We added a clause that if for some reason we go to remote and we have the authority now to adjust Schedule B salaries based on the number of weeks in the role. And so once we satisfy that requirement, the Schedule B nomination list is in the packet. And there's also one additional coach that need to be brought forward too, and that's the assistant cross-country coach. So that's a nomination tonight.
Any questions on any of those Schedule B nominations? No, it was all in our packet. All right, seeing none, that'll be an action item today. So we'll move on to financials, and we have monthly and quarterly financials. And Michelle.
Sure. In the packet, you should have seen both the September monthly one as well as the first quarter report. Just a couple things to point out, you know, and hopefully parents are listening too, just to remember that, you know, lunch and breakfast is free right now for all. And actually they just extended it through June for the whole state. As we got, you know, a couple weeks under our belt, you know, we don't obviously have the subscription, probably the wrong word, but just the word I chose, to not purchase, but just take advantage of an opportunity for breakfast and a lunch, whether you're remote or you're not. We definitely can work with you if you're even at home remote and chose to do the remote thing for the whole year, just like we did the last time when we were in remote. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing is when I did the financial in August, I had thought that there were a couple big POs from other individuals that I don't do, but I'm involved in the process, that kind of came into fruition in September, so that, you know, we kind of try to go to the worst case scenario, but I thought that those were already done. The problem is really, you know, because this year's different, you know, people started later, things were kind of not decided until later. And so not everybody has been in staff in the district in various roles at all times. So it's been better as time has progressed. But the hope would be that as we move further in the year, that actually the fund balance would go up. One thing to point out is, like, for instance, Steve and I recently did apply for the ESSA grant. So once we get approval on that, then we can shift the 45,000 some odd dollars that's in the general fund expense actually over to the grant. So that will create that in the fund balance. That just gives an example of just like different things that could happen, as the months go on. And also not knowing about how long we might be in this environment, or if we would go to remote. I'm kind of henching worst case scenario. Hopefully it's not going to be worst case scenario. So those expenses would be less in that area as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Any questions?
Actually, I have two questions. So just to clarify, so just because lunch is free and breakfast and lunch are free, does that means that the state will give us money for those meals eaten?
Well, yes, we don't look for payment at all from anybody, and they're definitely reimbursed by the state.
Fantastic.
Get the word out.
I know. You have to make as much lunch for your children. So that was one question. My second question was, do you have just a ballpark idea of how much we've spent so far on COVID related expenses this year?
I know we've encumbered an expense, so it's kind of hard. So like if you look at the line, for instance, and actually it is in the quarterly report. So if you look at 10, 0, 21, 26, 20, 335, 610, it'll show you what's in there. So it's somewhere in the vicinity of 40,000-ish was expended, but there's a bunch that's encumbered. So, I've been using kind of like the 80-ish figure, just to round up. We haven't ventured much more off of that because we've done a pretty good job about having a bunch in stock. And now that we're seeing how things are flowing, meaning we have a mask for anybody that wants it, a staff member. However, a lot of people wear their own masks, but we don't know that. And when we're trying to plan for it, just as an example, or like kids and different things like that. So, but the good thing is unfortunately, well, good and bad, we will need these things for a while and they will not turn bad. And so, and we're diligent about making sure we have enough though, because we don't want to be at the beck and call. And that's always been our thing, is that we don't want to get gouged. Like, unfortunately, some people or businesses, districts, towns, whatever, if you need something and you don't have it, sometimes you have to pay a little bit more. And so we're trying not to have that happen.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
And Michelle, I absolutely love it when you throw out the exact number, the 10-digit number so I love it when you do it at the budget committee. I really love it when you do it there, but I like it when you do it here too.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the financials? Maybe we can play Stump Michelle and ask her which codes certain expenses are in. Maybe one day.
Michelle, on buying PPE, is it taken a long time to get it, or is it pretty quick that's coming in?
Well, there were some things that that we had a hard time with. When we ordered it, kind of a little bit, maybe a little bit too much information for some, but I think it's important to know, is that we ordered a lot of stuff early, but we didn't order it unless the vendor said they had it in stock. The problem is that similar, I think, to the Chromebook, the vendors overcommitted out there, and they didn't realize how things were going to really fly out there. And then all of a sudden they started getting all these POs. So like, for instance, the mobile shields that if some people have gone to the schools and stuff, they see them on some of the desks and stuff. Those were purchased, or I should say encumbered, because, you know, we didn't pay for them, I think July. But the problem is that we didn't get them until right around when we opened. And then we actually got them right after, up until what we had ordered. And so, you know, which is kind of a little bit disheartening, but so yeah, there's been some things, and I know hand sanitizer has been a big thing.
Other questions for Michelle? All right, thanks, Michelle. Appreciate all your work and your explanations. So we have several anonymous donations, which is always wonderful to see. I don't know, Steve, if you want to speak to those.
Sure. I'll just run through. We had a lot of donations tonight.
Oh, look at that, we do.
Absolutely appreciate all the support from the community. We've got a $1,000 donation anonymous to 2nd grade at Harold Martin, $1,000 at 4th grade at Maple, $500 donation from the Metzger family for the golf team. Truly one of the great things in the last few years is working with the Hopkinton Public Schools Foundation. They're supporting the purchase of an application software K6 called IXL Literacy and Math, and we piloted it in the past, and it's a significant investment by the Hopkinton Public Schools Foundation in our work. So working with that, PTA, the $1,200 donation, I think it's for the Great Stoneface books there, and we've got music ukuleles I think they're purchasing for Ben at Maple. And we're going to install another lending library. I think you've seen them all around. We have one in Harold. It looks like the Birdhouse, but it's a free open lending library. I've seen them at some state parks in New Hampshire and some other places. So we're going to have one at Maple. So just very honored and humbled to bring all those donations to the board tonight.
That's amazing. It's great to see. Thanks to everybody. That's wonderful. Any questions for Steve on any of these items? All right, and those will be action items. Thanks, Steve. So Finance Committee update. Rob, I know you and Norm and Steve and Michelle have been busy over the past a couple of weeks and months working on this. So
sure. So Steve, can you let me, I'm going to attempt to share my screen because I've got those two.
Yeah, you should be okay.
Okay. So the first thing you should see here is, can you see that?
We sure can.
Your budget bulletin outline?
Yep.
So there's been a lot of talk about the budget and transparency and the amount of information that people have. So what I attempted to do and that we talked about was this page represents everything that is in the current budget bulletin that Steve and Michelle have been putting out for years. And when you look at it in this format, there's a lot of information here. So, you know, it starts district-wide by budget components, and I won't quiz Michelle on the numbers, and then the district-wide operations. So salaries and benefits for everybody in the district, and then broken down into instructional, admin, transportation, and so on. And then there's some summary by locations, gross numbers. So you're looking at each of the schools and what is on salaries and what is on special ed, so on and so forth, but just gross numbers. And then district-wide, there are reports on all of those elements, starting with regular ed and moving down to other funds. So, you know, when folks say there's not a lot of information out there, I would push back on that a little bit and say there is a lot of information. I think we've also talked about the formatting of the document and how to maybe, right now things are generally presented in a 5-year time span. And one of the things as we compared to Hudson was they use a 3-year time span. So to perhaps move to that, which allows us to use fonting and be able to get the document into a little bit more readable format. So there were some things that I think we could do a little bit differently, like on pupil transportation. It doesn't break it down by the district cost versus first student versus special ed. So maybe we'd want to see some level there. So variable things that we can do at this point. But the big variation that we discussed at the committee was you go to Hudson, you can go to any of their schools and see a breakout by school and down 2 lines. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So what I did was I met with all of the building principals and took this document and said, okay, what can we take from the district-wide and perhaps share information by school, and what might that look like? So at the Hopkinton Middle High School, we talked about showing regular education costs, which is already out there, salaries and supplies, but then also breaking things down by department, and again, salaries and supplies. Now, if you go to the Hudson documents, you will see not only the salaries for a department, but you will see the salaries of all of the individual teachers within those departments. You will also see line items for supplies. You know how much they spent on beakers in the science department, and you know how much they spent on hand sanitizer in the nurse's office. I had an interesting conversation with Chris Kelly about that. He's knows one of the principals down there, and I think this is, you know, sort of a line between providing a lot of information and transparency, but also not encouraging micromanagement. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but his colleague in Hudson talked about, you know, in their budget process, there becomes a lot of questions about those lines. And I personally don't know the benefit of questioning, you know, Matt Christie and Wood Technology and why he spent X amount of money on number 2 Pine versus number grade. I mean, I just don't understand why we would want to do that. And I think that we should leave those kinds of decisions to the department heads and to the principals to determine. So it would be my recommendation that we show broad supply lines, but not line items. Now, you know, the other thing I learned in this is Michelle has a really snazzy planning document for all of the buildings that the principals use. And it gets into sort of that degree. So whether or not we could produce that and do that in this format, that's, you know, up for discussion. But I don't think it's in the best interest of what we're trying to do. We would like to present more information, but not so much that we're haggling over, you know, as I've said a few too many times, frisbees. At Maple Street and at Harold Martin, it changes a bit because they don't necessarily have departments. So you could have a regular ed, but then broadly, instead of by, you know, grade 4, 5, 6, English supplies, math supplies, science, that they all share. And also because it's shared across, it's not necessarily salaries for those elements. So unlike where you would be able to say at the middle high school, we know exactly what it costs to run the English department, we wouldn't be able to say that at Harold Martin or at Maple Street. The other components that we talked about was special ed services, clubs, athletics at the high school. Sorry to scroll back up again. But, you know, one of the things is, would the board be interested in a by sport breakdown, a by club breakdown, the performing arts? Those are all things that we could talk about. And again, this is all work that would have to be done because these things are not currently built. And I'll give you a little bit more on that in a minute. And then again, at Harold Martin, it looked very much like what it looked like at Maple Street. So, and we discussed that Steve and Michelle and Norm and I would get together sometime in the next couple of weeks and look at some of the planning documents and think about how we could do this and which lines we would take out to make it as a part of a report. And I think, I'll just look at my notes real quick and make sure I didn't miss something that I wanted to share with you guys. Yeah, so that, I mean, that is the notion, is to work on the formatting of the current budget bulletin and then add a level of detail by school and by various departments. If you guys have questions, I'd be happy to have comments.
Can I comment?
Yeah. Whatever you like, Norm.
No, and I want to say thanks to Rob, Michelle, and Steve. You know, they spent a lot of hours on this. You know, Rob and I met socially distanced 30 feet away to go over this in person, because it was a lot easier to discuss this, because, you know, I had a vision of what I was looking for. He had his vision. And, you know, as two board members, we have to come to an agreement to bring this to you. And I just I support this. It's a step in the right direction for what this community is looking for. I do want this board to give us suggestions if they're looking for something different. Because, you know, I want this budgeting process to be, you know, as a team, you know, working with our district staff in order to provide an opportunity to the community to understand this budget better. So I encourage you to make recommendations that you'd like to see. I think Rob and I are really looking forward to putting this together. It's going to be a lot of work, but that's why we're here. You know, that's why we're elected officials, to do what we can for this community.
Is this something that you guys can like physically share with us or send to us so we can
absolutely
digest a little more? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, Norm, and Steve, Michelle. I think this is kind of answering at least some of the concerns or just desires of members of the community. I agree, Rob, on the supply side, that you know, getting into the number of pencils and pens, it probably isn't the level of detail. It's not a level of detail, I think, for decision making among our community and supporting a budget. I think having an idea how much we're spending on supplies is good, but I think, you know, trying to cut beakers or cut number 2 pencils out probably isn't the level of detail that really anybody is looking for. So I think that's wise to kind of keep it at a less of a granular level there. And then on the question around athletics, I've heard from a bunch of people that that's important, and so I'm not suggesting or trying to make, you know, a whole bunch of additional work, but I do think if that was something that was able to be pulled out, I do think there would be people would find that beneficial. I know that we've been asked that question a lot. I haven't been asked the same thing about clubs, and so I don't know how important it is to break out every single club and how much we spend. But athletics, I have heard around individual sports for what it's worth.
Well, I would think that if we're going to do that, we should probably look at clubs and performing arts, because they're all fairly similar in that there are Schedule B components to it, and that there's also, other costs, and the kids do pay fees for a lot of those things. But whatever the board wants, we can certainly do. Any other questions? And then I'll move on to the other document.
I guess my last question is, Rob, is this going to be done by man? Or are we going to have a program that's going to be able to generate this report?
Thank you, Norm, for bringing that up. That was the other thing I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So one of the things that we discussed is currently our system, and Michelle has a number of different names for these systems, so I don't remember which one it is, but essentially this stuff is part of a software system that allows her to generate reports. So if we were to do things in a vastly different way outside of that, then we would have to spend some money to have that software revamped in order to produce those reports. And my personal feeling is that, as we are looking at a different superintendent next year who may have different, approaches for us, or that it would seem unwise to spend money now for something that we might want to do differently, 9 months from now. So I would say that if we can, whatever we can do that's manageable for Michelle and for Steve, with whatever help we can provide, that's what we should do. But we should do it without an impact of having to expend funds for software or changes.
And I guess I appreciate that, although I also appreciate how much work it is to manually do this type of exercise. And so I don't do it, so I don't know how much work it is, but I assume it's well north of no work or nothing. And so so I don't know. I mean, this is maybe for something for Steve and Michelle to think about. Not to put you guys on the spot now, but is really understanding how much additional time it would be to manually create this type of information, and because I think that will, just to answer the question, I think that will help me figure out, is it doable within our current workload, or is it something that if we're going to do it, we are going to have to spend some money to get it done? And I guess I don't really know the answer to that. Or Rob, I don't know if you have an inkling there.
Michelle would have a better inkling than I, but I guess just as a layman looking at the planning documents, that we should be able to pull a lot of this information from the planning documents. I don't know if that's accurate or not. Maybe Michelle can speak to that, but
yeah, so the planning documents are used, like there's different columns. So there's like a department column, an administrator column, a superintendent column. So the planning documents that Rob's referring to are a planning document before salaries and benefits are even populated in. And so they're of the administrator column. It would just be, I believe, if it's the same document that ends up being the one that is going to do what it is, it's me having to spend the time to change in the Cognos report, which is kind of like when you want a homemade, we'll just call it non-custom or a custom report done. You would have it done in that environment to say the right column so that it would pull in the data that actually the salaries would be in.
And Jim, I think that's part of the discussion that we were planning to have the next time that we meet.
Perfect. That's helpful. Thanks.
All right.
We've been meeting almost every other week to discuss this, so we've got a lot of work to do, and
going to try and put that one away. Oop. That window has closed, and I'm going to share this other document if I may. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna preface this with, this is a beginning attempt to think about the budget. It is, and that's really about what it is at this point. So what I did here was take those broad categories from the budget bulletin, and they are here: salaries, benefits, professional services, so on and so forth. There's our debt service, last year's amount, and then this year, the bond number coming forward. Other funds, which represent things like federal projects, food service, Fund 8, which I don't know what that is, but Michelle could tell us, and capital projects. But my understanding from Steve today was that is, we don't spend those monies unless those monies come in. So that's always going to be at 0% year to year. This was the budget that we passed this past August. And so I did some projections, and looking at salaries, things that we are committed to contractually, the Teamsters at about 10,700, Hess at a little more than 59,000. And then just a projection, if we were to do an admin raise of about 2%, this would be your number, and it would represent year over year, 0.88% increase. So a little bit less than 1% on salaries. In benefits, it's a very different picture. The projections for healthcare and for the New Hampshire retirement system bring us over that 7% mark at about $425,000. And again, for the folks that are listening, and this is a lot of the conversation we had last year, these are things that we have no control over. These are inflationary costs. It's going to be a part of our budget, whether we like it or not. So just to kind of keep that in mind. Then the professional services, these are people that we contract within the school to do work. And this was a big wild guess on my part, just putting forward a 3% projection on that. But again, this is just playing with numbers. These aren't, this one in particular is not a real number. Property services, you know, I left this one flat, and this is, you know, speaking to the community last year and holding the line on growth, saying, okay, where we can, we're going to hold prices down. And another sheet that'll change this a little bit. The problem here on the property services is we're going to be adding to the footprint at Harold Martin School. So you're going to have 4 more classrooms, some new office space that would require more manpower to maintain. So we'd have to think about that. And, you know, this in terms of recommendations to the superintendent from the board, this column is saying, you know, contractual and admin raises only, and benefits inflation only, current contractual. Property services, we'd like to see flatter inflation only. Transportation and tuition, flat inflation consolidate. And Steve and I had a short conversation about, you know, have we learned anything in COVID that might allow us to move from 8 bus runs to 7 bus runs? I don't know the answer to that. For a student may be able to explore that. It would require people to shift how they think about the number of students that take the bus, where you take the bus from, where pickups are. But it doesn't speak to capacity. So if we have X number of students, they can only fit on so many buses. So if that happens, we're still at 8. But if it means capacity is less because people are taking their kids to school more or would be willing to do that, then maybe 7 is possible. Supplies and books. This particular sheet just said if we just go with last year's numbers, that's where we're at. So the operating budget without the bond brings us to 2.71%. And for people who like that in numbers, that's $532,000 more than last year. And then I wanted to break out, so that would be an increase on the tax rate of 70 cents. So the delta, as Steve likes to remind me, between last year's budget and this year's budget, you take it to the 100,000 and multiply by 13 cents, and you end up at 70. The bond, I wanted to break that out separately and, you know, remind people that this is a pre-obligation that we all voted on at school district meeting. It is a part of the operating budget, but it is, again, something that we don't control at this point. Last year we were at 127.5, and this year that'll be at 294. The total bond represents about 40 cents in taxes, but the increase from last year to this year represents a 21-cent increase on the tax rate. So all said and done, if, you know, through Steve and Michelle's magic, this would occur, you'd be at 91 cents on the tax rate. Moving down into potential warrant articles and just, again, thinking out loud. No one knows what next year is going to bring. Typically, we've had a contingency fund. And if we are still in a situation where we're dealing with this pandemic, it might be wise to set money aside for that. If we don't need to use it, that's great. But if we do need to use it to hire more staff to do things that we've learned this year that we're not able to do, then we would have the money. For the maintenance trust or the capital improvement plan, staying consistent with the 142.5, the special ed trust consistent, and the vehicle trust 15,000. But I think that may be changing because of some transportation. Now the HEA, I don't want to say anything to the negotiating sides. I just took what was in last year's warrant and divided the 3-year cost increase. So if you disaggregated that to an annual cost, it was 310,000. So the changes here would be this 100,000 in that 310, which would create an increase of 53 cents on the tax rate. So all totaled, if you're using this sort of just thinking out loud, we'd be looking at 5.25% warrants and operating budget at $1.44. Now, none of this takes into account revenue. And I know that's another piece of the puzzle, We know we've got some revenue issues, but I didn't want to get into that too much tonight. You know, just thinking about what's happened in the last few weeks, we know we've got the state adequacy or the state one-time money of 650,000 or so. We also know that we have some students that are not in our schools, so we're losing some aid from that. You know, the homeschool situation is somewhere around 32 to 40 students, so that's in the neighborhood of 120 to 140,000, which brings us to an $800,000 revenue gap, if you will. But then, you know, today we get information that there's more CARES money coming through. A quick math is 184,000. So the reason why there's not a lot of discussion of revenue here is I think until after the election is over and the legislature has made some decisions, then we'll know a lot more about how to deal with the revenue side. And if you'll just bear with me for 1 minute, this sheet is exactly like the second sheet, except that, so these projections would be the same, but these show what does this look like if we try to trim supplies, books, and equipment by 5%. And if we are to do that, we were at, sorry, short-term memory loss, we were at 91 cents, and that brings us down to 83 cents. So there are certainly a lot of challenges that are in place, but I wanted to do this as a kicking off point to just think about categories based on last year and what some reasonable thoughts might be on where inflation is and where our obligations are. Sorry if that took longer than. And anybody has questions, I'd be happy to try to answer.
Thanks, Rob and Norm and Steve and Michelle. This is helpful as sort of as Rob says, a kicking off point. And I guess my one question just has to do with the benefit line. And every time I think we start into budget process, you know, the benefit line is always the kind of the shocker. And so I'm just curious, the 7.65%, is that something that I don't know what the right word is. I mean, is that including what we know of as sort of a GMR, or is this speculation of where health and then the retirement benefits are likely to be as we put the planning together? Just more of a curiosity question.
So I can speak to half of that, and then I'll defer to Steve or Michelle on the other half. So the New Hampshire retirement system has announced what the increase is going to be. Okay. So what our share of cost for the retirement for teachers and admin is, and that's a known quantity. The healthcare side, I will leave to Steve or Michelle to answer that.
It's coming soon. The board that just recently met, right, Michelle? We should have it soon, I think.
I just got it. It's a 6% increase.
So that line is a combination of the actuarial plus, then it would, you know, we'll figure out a 6% increase. And then and what Michelle has always taught me, there's also the 6% increase and there's plan changes.
That's right.
So if someone goes single to get married or married to have kids or hires, so plan changes are not insignificant as well.
So Rob, the only other piece, I guess it's more of a comment than it is a question. But on your second sheet that you showed, which actually I think you're on here now,
yeah.
It's just an observation that, you know, reducing the lines that I think you reduced for,
yeah,
doesn't, I mean, we're not going to lower the tax rate significantly by, you know, cutting back on our supplies, books, and some replacement equipment. And that's not where, you know, no matter where we want to go, the community wants to go, those aren't the places that we're going to find huge reductions or huge savings.
That is correct.
More just an observation, because I know people often do say, you know, why don't you reduce your supplies or really look in those items, and we can, and I know Steve and Michelle does, and we're not getting to a much lower tax rate by scrimping in those areas. No. I think this displays this very well. So.
All right. Well, nobody else. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Jim, or to Norm, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to turn it right over to Norm. So.
Okay, perfect. Hey, Rob, thank you for sharing the information. So I want to thank Jim for coming last night to the budget committee meeting. Last night's meeting went very well. Happy to report. And we had a couple discussions back and forth last night, which I have to bring back to them. We've discussed the date in January, which I will report back to the committee. The question they're asking for us for a simple answer is, and I think Michelle and Steve will have that, is how much did we pay on the George Park project? So if I could have that, I can send it over to the budget committee. I know the town paid a portion and we paid a portion. They're just looking for the breakdown on that.
Yeah, so it's right on the CIP document.
Okay.
I believe it's $22,000-ish.
Yeah, 22 big ones.
Yeah.
20 originally, we had to come back to 2 more.
Okay, so I'll get together, making sure I have the right number, and I'll bring that to them. The other question was for Jim. When Jim gave his presentation, it was asked about the boiler. Jim, maybe you can talk a little bit about their...
Yeah, thanks, Norm. Yeah, so I presented the CIP and one of the items in the CIP, and they were looking ahead, I think it was in 2023 at Harold Martin School, $140,000 for a boiler. I think they were just, it was $140,000 for a boiler. I believe it was at Harold Martin. They were just asking just what that item was, and I didn't know. I assume it's a boiler.
Yeah, so we have 2 boilers at each building. So what it is we have a fairly new boiler at every building now, but the other one is pretty old. And so it's trying to replace the oil boiler at Harold Martin because we got to start replacing the second unit in each of those buildings, or we're going to have another situation where and the reason why you have to, for those that are probably thinking like, why would you even have to, is because sometimes one doesn't work and if you need the other one.
Redundant systems are a good thing.
Yeah. Or even some cold days, actually, you use both. Like, you know what I mean? Like for the high school, especially because they're on the same heating source, you need it both.
And the replacement cost of that boiler, I think that's probably what they were looking at, is 140 grand, and that's a pretty accurate estimation.
Yeah, it's based on what we've done in the past. We do need to relook at that, which the facility director is working on getting quotes first on the ones that are up very soon, and then working the way through to get more reflective, updated numbers.
Perfect.
So it was a quick meeting to discuss budget driving factors. You know, Jim presented a CIP, our plan, and in the meeting I discussed our bond rate moving forward, just so they had an idea where we were with the tax rate kind of moving forward over the next couple of years. We talked a little bit about driving factors of health insurance, the increase that we got to pay for the 2-year contract for health insurance for the state. I think, is that the right analogy to use?
That's retirement.
Yeah, the retirement. Thank you. It's getting late. The retirement. And our next meeting is November 18th. So I will bring back the information that was discussed tonight to them. Does anyone have any questions? Perfect. I want to thank you again, Jim, for taking time out of your day to come and present the CIP. I will say they were very happy to see that. I think Dawn did a little dance in the corner of my screen, so I think they're very happy.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna throw in. It's just, I think there was a lot of kudos thrown to Steve and Michelle for all the hard work that you guys have put in, and it's reflected in the CIP, and they were definitely appreciative of the hard work and really liked to see that document, and was very pleased. So I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that there was a lot of kudos.
Thank you. Good work, Michelle.
Thanks, Norm. So the last two items we have here, we have the Harold Martin preschool room ventilation project, which we had a public hearing preceding this meeting. And I just want to make sure you guys are all set on the action item. If there's any additional questions, happy to answer them. Feels like we're good. And then tuition tax rate setting. I know there's an action item there. We discussed it at the top of this meeting. Just make sure everybody is all set or have any questions on that. All right, feels like we're all set. So this brings us to the second public comment opportunity this evening. And so thanks to everybody who is still with us here at 9 o'clock. And so I'll just ask if there's anybody who wishes to provide public comment. You can go down to the bottom of your screen, hit the raise hand button, and that lets us know you have public comment, and we can call on you. So at this point, I would just ask if there's any public comment, and a few hands have gone up. So we'll start with Andy Locke. Andy, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks. And just really a very brief word. I just, you talked briefly about the hybrid remote options, and really it's all about academic progress. And I think that, you know, we're 4 weeks into the school year. We've got a 2-week late start. So we're about 6 weeks in theoretically, which means we're about 3 weeks behind. So with every week, I think we fall behind a little bit more. So I want to stress urgency to think about how we get ourselves on track academically.
Appreciate the comment. Thank you. The next hand up is Catherine Matteo. Good evening, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine Matteo, 108 Park Ave. I did want to say thank you very much for the presentation on how you guys might present your budget this year. I think everything that was shown was a really great approach, and you know, hopefully it's feasible for Michelle, because I can't imagine how much Michelle does. I'm an accountant for a small company, so I totally empathize with, you know, trying to do the custom reports and stuff. But I think if you can do that, especially after what happened last time, I think that would be awesome. You guys are definitely listening to the community, and I'm so happy to see that. And then something totally unrelated, totally selfish, is I'm hoping that at some point we can look at maybe having our robotics club in the engineering room, like maybe even just once a week. So we only have 13 students. So I think in that large room, along with the wood room that we also usually use, we can keep the kids socially distanced. And, you know, we talked about even making our own masks and getting face shields, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I know, you know, with everything else going on, we didn't want to keep pushing, but just as like a crazed robotics mom, you know, with my 17-year-old kid that loves robotics, just please keep that in mind, that like these kids are desperate to get back together and build robots. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it. Next hand up is Molly Richter. Good evening, Molly.
Hi there. I don't want to keep you guys on any later. I don't know if I missed it. I'm wondering, Steve, if you could share any more detail about what specifically is holding things back from synchronous learning being plausible. I don't know if it's something, is it the technology? I mean, I heard you guys talking about the difficulty in teaching to 2 audiences at once, of course, but I'm just unclear on where we're at. And I'm thinking about it in terms of, is there anything that the community could do to help facilitate this? Those donations you got, great. Is there anything else that could be done to help toward this? And I guess I'm also wondering specifically, I think I remember there was talk early on about the math department piloting synchronous learning. And I don't think that that's happening. And I'm just wondering if you could give us an update on where we're at with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Sure.
Steve?
Real quick, the a couple of barriers. One is we want to make sure we have the technology. If we do get a Chromebook for every child, that can help. The other piece is staffing right now to manage, as Andrea talked about, the remote learning facilitators. In order to manage the system as it is with a number of teachers teaching remotely, some of our staff that is assigned to support staff on one day, to support students on one day, is actually supporting classes on the other. So as we take a look at the model, we got to figure out how we can staff and make sure that all the classes are covered by remote learning specialists, that role, and make sure we have the technology. But we've got the scheduling committee, we'll look at it this week.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Molly.
Thanks.
So I'm not seeing any other hands, and so I am going to end the public comment period. Thank you all for listening in and being part of the conversation. So if there's nothing else from the board, I'm going to move on to the action items. And so we've already approved the MOA with Hess. And so I would ask if there is a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to withdraw up to $18,000 from the Hopkinton School District Building Repair and Maintenance Fund for the purchase and installation of an ERV at Harold Martin School.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none. Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm.
Norm Gupel, yes.
Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth.
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Jim O'Brien is yes. So that motion passes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to waive bid policy DJE and designate the ERV project as a change order in the current facility project, thereby authoring BPS to oversee the work?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? And just so everybody out there, BPS is Bonaparte Page and Stone, which is our construction management firm for the building project.
Great people.
Hearing no further discussion, Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm.
Norm Gupel, yes.
Andrea Folsom, yes. We can't hear you again, yes. Jim.
Hold that microphone up.
Yeah.
Mr. A. Frame.
Mr. A. Frame votes yes.
Jim O'Brien votes yes, and I just I want to thank Steve and the building principals and everybody for sort of coming up with the solution and moving on it, because I do think getting that room back in working order is a great step. So thank you all. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve Sean Martin, full-time night custodian at Harold Martin School, pending the final approval of the superintendent of schools?
So moved, and welcome aboard.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm.
Welcome aboard. Norm Gupel, yes.
Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth A. Frame.
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Jim O'Brien is a yes. That passes 5-0. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the 2020-2021 tuition rates of $17,478.04 for elementary and $15,526.55 for the secondary, pending the final approval of the superintendents of schools?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none. Seth.
Seth A. Frame, yes.
Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm.
Norm Gupel, yes.
Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to accept an anonymous $1,000 donation to the second grade at Harold Martin School?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I just want to say, whoever it is, thank you. I think that's a great donation. It's always great to see people giving back to this school district, and I just want to say thank you.
All right.
So, yeah, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Norm.
Well, thank you. Norm is a yes.
Rob.
Rob Nato, yes.
Andrea.
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to accept an anonymous $1,000 donation to the 4th grade class at Maple Street School?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just repeat the same thing I did the last time.
Thank you. Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
And Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent's recommendation to accept a $500 donation from the Metzger family for the HMHS golf team?
So moved. Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion?
Thank you, Lisa and Scott.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent's recommendation to accept support from the Hopkinton Public Schools Foundation in the amount not to exceed $8,600 for technology software for Harold Martin School and Maple Street School?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? It's a very generous gift.
Very, yeah.
Much.
Yeah.
Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is yes. Is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve the superintendent's recommendation to accept the following donations from the Hopkinton PTA? The HMS Library, $1,000, MSS Music, $2,000, and MSS Lending Library, $1,000.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
I love the PTA.
A big thank you.
Yeah, big thank you.
Norm?
Norm Gupel is a yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Jim O'Brien is a yes. And is there a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the Schedule B nomination list as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm? Norm, you muted yourself.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Norm Gupel, yes.
And Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
All right, so that is the list of action items. Steve, do you have a need for non-public? Steve, you're muted too.
Sorry, you've got to do the superintendent documents.
Yeah.
From Althea, Hazard, and Young.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I don't have it in front of me. Seth, what's the official name of the document that we would be approving? It's
the leadership profile and related documents.
Yep.
Perfect. Is there a motion to accept the leadership profile and related documents as presented this evening by Hazard and Young?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on those? Hearing none. Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
Andrew?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. Thank you, Steve and Michelle, for reminding me to do that. Appreciate that. So Steve, on non-public, do you have a need?
I don't unless you do.
So we will under C for reputation, if people are amenable to that. And what I would ask, well, actually, so I'd make a motion. Actually, I won't make a motion. Is there a motion for the board to go into non-public session under RSA 91A3, Roman 2C for reputation?
So moved.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion? Andrea?
Andrea Folsom, yes.
Norm?
Norm Gupel, yes.
Rob?
Rob Nato, yes.
Seth?
Jose Frame, yes.
And Jim O'Brien is a yes. So I will send you all a link to your SAU email in just a few minutes. And if we just say, and you know, it's like at 9:20, 9:22, if people want to hop on, that would be great. I want to thank I want to thank our student reps for there's Mia for probably sitting through one of the longest school board meetings that we've had in a little while, and so your initial run. I apologize a bit, but I also you're seeing how sausage is made in real time here with us. So I really appreciate you sticking with us. And you can always feel free to reach out to any of us on the board or to Steve. I know if you have questions or want to dig deeper in anything that we talked about here this evening, we're all happy to answer any questions that you might have. But thank you very much, and we look forward to having you join us in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Unless there's anything else, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all, and thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Attending.